It was unbelievable. What's this? He pulled the red gloves next to him and pointed at the thing at the fork in the road. The red gloves glanced at it and answered stiffly, "Relics from the border." "I know this is a relic from the border, but why would it appear here?" Huaisher opened his eyes wide, squatting on the ground at the fork in the road. He suspiciously looked at the relic from the border that was thrown on the ground. It could be said to be luxurious ribs, with a faint fragrance on it, as if it had been worn by a soft and fragrant lady for a long time. He did not know why, but the appearance of amber appeared in his mind. "I've seen a ghost." Huaisher could not help but shake his head. How rich was this woman to throw a relic worth at least a few million US dollars everywhere? He casually picked it up and threw it to the red gloves. "Put it in the basket and keep it." He continued to walk forward, and then at the next fork in the road, he froze in place and continued to rub his eyes. Did he see another relic from the border? An old flintlock pistol with an ancient aura was lying on the ground. It had been placed in a box, and it looked very precious. In some embarrassing game, it would be at least +7, right? Can this thing be thrown away casually? He froze for a moment, glanced around, and did not see the owner. After thinking for a long time, he could not resist the temptation of money, picked up the gun, and stuffed it into his pocket. He continued to walk forward. Then, at the next fork, he saw another relic from the border. A bracelet. "I'm shocked. What the hell is this?" Huaisher was stunned. He thought for a moment, and felt that this was some kind of situation, but in the end, he still chose it. He picked it up, kicked it into his backpack, and continued to walk forward. The further he went, the more relics from the border on the ground, the more expensive they were, and the more beautiful they looked. It was as if the sky was throwing money. Relics from the border that were hard to find and worth tens of thousands of dollars were now scattered all over the ground. Huaisher was too lazy to bend over when he encountered cheap goods, but he still stuffed a full bag. He felt that this world was simply too strange. Inexplicably, they began to give out big discounts at the end of the year. "Do you have any clues?" Huaisher turned around and asked the red gloves. The red gloves still had an expression that said, "I'm a tool, and I don't know what you're talking about." The basket on his back was already filled with guns and cannons picked up along the way. Huaisher lowered his head and looked at the equipment in his backpack, and then looked at the relics on the ground that stretched all the way to the front, turning left and right to the Gate of Victory, and so on. It felt like a trap with corn to trick sparrows into jumping into. Who would be fooled by this kind of trick? Huaisher lowered his head and continued to pick up the good things on the ground. He moved forward step by step, turning left and right. He hated that he did not bring a few more bags. Now he could only pick up and throw away one item after another like a bear in a cornfield. His heart was bleeding. "It's too wasteful, too wasteful." He sadly threw away a weapon, picked up a pair of boots from the ground, and stuffed them into his basket. "Too wasteful." Click! A crisp sound came from the darkness in the distance. Huaisher raised his head in shock and subconsciously crawled on the ground. Then he saw the blazing flames converging into a chain and whistling over in an instant with a burst of roar. The iron fire turned into a torrential rain, tearing the walls apart layer by layer. The whip of thunder and fire swept across, instantly tearing apart the walls and buildings, sweeping everything on the street into pieces. The red glove's reaction was stiff. He was a beat slower and turned into pieces under the crazy firepower. All the equipment he picked up flew into the sky and was immediately torn into countless pieces under the rapid and violent firepower. Huaisher was dumbfounded. How could he not know what this thing was? But in this hell, where did such a heavy machine gun with such exaggerated firepower come from? It should be known that the common firearms manufactured in batches based on the rules of the present realm were often difficult to use smoothly at the border or in hell. It was still okay at the border, and they were often stuck or something. But in hell, which did not have the great mystic instrument, Zarathustra, they were often greeted with self-destruction or simply turned into a pile of scrap iron under the erosion of the abyss sediment. Any firearm that could be used in hell was often a treasure that had been passed down in the present realm for a long time, or a precious semi-relic of the border type that had been endowed with a small mystic instrument by alchemy. As an independent miracle, they were almost not inferior to the stigmata relics of the same level. If used properly, they were more than enough to kill 1 or 2 grade 4. Why would someone use a cannon to kill a mosquito? Although his mind was in a mess, Huaisher's movements did not stop. After quickly getting rid of the burden, he hid behind layers of walls until the roaring gunshots finally stopped abruptly after a long time. At least thousands of bullets had been used up. In the dust and ashes that were constantly flying up, there was the sound of the bullet chain running out of ammunition. Huaisher narrowed his eyes and poked his head out of the ruins to take a look. The keen perception brought by the mirror of nothingness allowed him to see through the dust and smoke, and he saw the heavy machine gun at the end of the long street. There were also bullet casings rolling on the ground, as well as the empty ammunition box next to it. As he expected, the heavy machine gun exuded a dark golden light that made people jealous, but the barrel had been burned red and twisted. It was obvious that it could no longer be used. He sucked in a breath of cold air. He did not expect the Shinua framework to have such a terrifying weapon of mass destruction. But then, in the slowly falling dust, he saw the slender figure coming out from behind the heavy machine gun. He froze on the spot. She was wearing an old-fashioned gray maid's overcoat and a white apron around her waist. Her long hair was tied up with a lace hair tie at the back of her head into a refreshing ponytail that hung down from her shoulders. Her smile was warm and gentle. Just looking at her made people feel that she was gentle and virtuous, and they wanted to take her home and be their wife. But for some reason, being stared at by that pair of quiet black eyes, they could not help but shiver. "Don't hide." Luo Xian waved in the direction of Huaisher. "I see you." "So, you are the one who brought the relics from the border?" Huaisher's face twitched. He turned around and looked at the red gloves without any bones left, as well as the broken relics from the border on the ground. His heart twitched in pain. "Ah, tens of millions of dollars worth of things, and you broke them all? Is that so?" Luo Xian casually raised her foot and stepped on the helmet next to her. Using the power of used steps, she casually crushed a rather luxurious relic into pieces. "Don't worry, there are actually a lot of these things. Junior brother, do you want them? I can give them all to you." In the dead silence, only the continuous roars and roars in the sky could be heard. Huaisher sighed and walked out of his hiding place. Looking at her smiling face, the chill of death grew thicker and thicker, almost engulfing him. She stood in front of the only exit and set up a heavy machine gun. It was impossible for her to cook and wait for him to go home together. Besides, he did not dare to eat. Smelling the thick stench of blood that lingered in the air, his heart gradually sank to the bottom of the earth. "Sister Xian, what do you want to do?" "Of course, I want to do something that I have always wanted to do." Luo Xian thought for a moment and chuckled softly. "Let's call it indulgence. You see, it's like the legend of tearing up the textbook after the college entrance examination and then going to the bar all night to see the adult world. Although I'm not that naive, I still can't help but want to take this opportunity to do something that the adults didn't allow me to do before." Huaisher's face twitched. Yes, the adults really won't let the children set up a crane gun to sweep people for fun. So are you satisfied? The time to experience the adult world is over. Hurry up and pack up and go home. He wanted to say so very much, but in the end, he did not make a sound. If things could be so simple, he dared to eat the heavy machine gun. He could feel that behind Luo Xian's smile, there was a kind of ferocious killing intent that was becoming more and more unconcealable. Just like a beast, grinding teeth and sucking blood, impatient. Chapter 285. Don't look at me like this. In fact, I'm already 24 years old this year. In the silence, Luo Xian sighed regretfully. I've never been in love, and I don't have a boyfriend, except for the guys who eat eggs every day and train their muscles in vain. I don't even have a suitable peer. Occasionally, I meet a few people I get along with, and they disappear after chatting for a while. As a result, I've reached the age where I don't know if I can be called a young girl anymore. Occasionally, when I go out on the street, I'll be called auntie by ignorant children. Can you understand this feeling? Looking at Weisher's stunned look, Luo Xian's smile became sly. Although I sometimes look very old-fashioned, sometimes I want to be bold. Weisher nodded stiffly. So, I want to experience what the so-called love is. What kind of thing is it? She seemed to be looking forward to it, and asked softly, It's understandable that a woman pursues her own happiness, right? Weisher was silent. At that moment, scarlet rain poured down endlessly from the sky. The realm of nothingness finally illuminated the surface of the quiet street, and he glimpsed the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood in front of the gate of victory. The corpses were almost piled up into a mountain, and the scarlet stream spread to Luo Xian's feet. Although that's true, he almost couldn't breathe. This happiness is a bit too exaggerated, isn't it? As the illusion shattered, the smile on Luo Xian's face also became fleeting. The empty shell belonging to a human was broken, revealing the boiling darkness that he had glimpsed in the mirror and the terrifying soul that was beyond the imagination of human beings. After the endless darkness and horror, the vicious eye that peeped at this place from a distance became clearer and clearer. The strange scene flashed by as if it was an illusion. Suddenly, Weisher finally understood why he hadn't seen any other contestants here for so long. Most likely, other than himself, there would not be any other contestants who would come here. Until now, he finally clearly understood how terrifying and huge the abnormality that entangled Luo Xian was. Once it broke out, it would probably become a real hell, right? This sublimated soul, after absorbing an unknown amount of abyssal precipitation, was already on the verge of solidification. It almost turned into darkness. Is it worth it? Weisher sighed, lowered his eyes, and slowly clenched the sword of virtue. After all, it's for love. Luo Xian looked at him quizzically. Didn't the book say that compared to love, breaking a leg or two doesn't matter? I thought someone like you, who risked your life for love, would understand me. This homophonic joke is not fun at all. Weisher stared at her face and asked expressionlessly, So, Luo Xian, what do you want to do? How about I be your enemy? She smiled. Last time, our duel wasn't over yet, right? But then, in the shadow behind her, the ghost with the red gloves appeared again, holding the sacrificial knife in his hand upside down, aiming at her back. Bang! The gloomy magic mirror emerged from Luo Xian's side, like a shield blocking this fatal blow. In an instant, the two crossed each other, and Weisher's chest appeared a tragic crack, blood gushing out. Luo Xian was unscathed. But then, Weisher ignored the crack in his chest, turned around abruptly, and chopped at Luo Xian's back with the deadly axe blade. It cut through the illusion. As the mirror shattered, Luo Xian appeared 10 steps away, looking at him with interest. There was no need for her to explain. Weisher suddenly understood. Sleeping Beauty? Luo Xian tilted her head, looked at the towering mirror beside her, and suddenly asked, Mirror, mirror, Who is the most beautiful woman in the world? A face appeared in the magic mirror and said flatteringly, "Of course it's you, Your Highness." It seemed to be some kind of blessing. In an instant, the waves of origin substance on Luo Xian's body rose steadily, until finally it almost formed a grayish-black flame, contrasting with her red clothes, which were as red as blood. No, it should be dyed red by the blood of ferocious beasts, right? Huaisher sucked in a breath of cold air, stretched out his hand, and pressed on the tree stump next to him. "Sorry, brother, let me absorb a little more." A huge amount of vitality flowed from the underground network of roots. The wound on Huaisher's chest closed, and the cracks in his bones and the strain on his muscles disappeared instantly. The bulging capillaries on his face also revealed a dark green color. The support of Brother Tree and Little Tree was enough. Under the transformation of the sacred mark, Huaisher ignored the gradual fibrosis of his internal blood vessels and poured an endless stream of blood qi into the mirror of nothingness, causing the light in his eyes to become brighter and brighter, as if a light bulb had been inserted. Gradually, it became dazzling. The mirror of nothingness finally reflected Luo Xian's true appearance completely. Chapter 286. No matter what, isn't this too much? Huaisher sucked in a cold breath. Even though he was prepared, he still couldn't believe his eyes. In the bubble reflected by the mirror of void, Luo Xian's body was already covered in cracks. She looked like a piece of porcelain that had been smashed and then pieced back together. Even though her skin was white and crystalline, it was still unable to seal off the darkness origin substance that flowed out of her body. It was just like a volcano. Endless darkness rose from within, and illusory smoke rose into the sky. It was as if a crack leading to another world had been torn open. Behind the endless darkness, a cruel eye covered with blood vessels stared at her back, and its gaze was filled with the virtue and madness of the abyss. If it weren't for the celestial genealogy's high adaptability to the abyss, she would have been solidified long ago. Was this the reason why the road to paradise chose her? No. Now, what was the difference between this terrifying corrosion and the corrosion after solidification? Her soul seemed to have been pieced together from the beginning. It was like a fruit planted from the soil of the abyss. Even though it was sweet and pleasant, it exuded a ferocious aura that didn't belong to human beings. She was inhuman in nature. Now, she was just peeling off the human shell little by little and returning to the group of monsters. Under the gaze of the strange, she gradually fell into the abyss. She was only a step away. How did you survive until now? Huaisher felt fear and puzzlement from the bottom of his heart. This kind of life, which seemed to be haunted by evil spirits from birth and was destined to be unbreakable, how could it last until today? Is it strange? Luo Xian replied with a smile. Of course, it's because of love. A lie. Huaisher was silent for a long time. He couldn't help but sigh, and slowly shook his head. Sister Xian, have you really felt the so-called love before? Luo Xian didn't answer. It was just that her smile became colder and colder. She was like a hungry wolf grandmother whose disguise was seen through. She could no longer smile kindly. Not everyone is as lucky as you. Why sure? She finally stopped laughing. She just quietly stared at the youth in front of her, separated by the red rain falling from the sky. Even if it's just a hell full of torture, for someone like me, it's still like heaven. I'm so happy to hear that. Huaisher opened his mouth and spat out a scorching breath, tearing apart the rain of blood in front of him. I feel like I'm completely different now. Yes, he was completely different. In the bursting dark green flames, countless capillaries burst open on Huaisher's face like a spider web. Blood dripped from his body, and countless flowers and plants grew from the broken asphalt road. Mushrooms grew from the spreading thin blood. Amidst the dense blood aura, countless invisible viruses spread out along with the black fog of fear. Under the crazy extraction without thinking of the consequences, Huaishur and the vitality network in the roots under his feet were almost completely connected. The first time he entered such a deep state was when he broke through from the first level and reshaped his body. But now he was hovering on the border between human and plant. He didn't know if there would be a day when he would return to human form if he completely turned into wood. Perhaps even the Shinue framework couldn't be used, and he would be imprisoned forever in the roots of Yamatai City's plants. It was almost like a gamble. From the mirror of nothingness, he gained strength. Under the broken boots, Huaishur's toes and fingers had already appeared with wood markings. Strands of vine branches and leaves grew out of his long hair. But the moment he took a step, his speed was beyond the past. He was almost on par with the former Van Helsing. Cheetah gallop! From the roar and rumble, Huaishur whistled through the air. He raised the knife and axe in his hands and chopped down. Finally, he forced Luo Xian to take a step back. Even if it was only one step, Huaishur's heart surged with ecstasy. Side-sweeping ground. The angry axe suddenly elongated. As Huaishur turned around, the invisible blade of the axe chopped towards Luo Xian's lower body. It was blocked by the long sword in her hand, and sparks flew. Tornado destroys the parking lot. In an instant, the knife, axe, sword, and spear in Huaishur's hands kept changing. At the critical moment, a steel storm was set off and chopped towards Luo Xian in front of him. Then, in front of the two long and short swords that opened and closed at will, they were blocked one by one. Luo Xian took a step forward and elbowed. In the roar, the air burst out. Huaishur instantly took a dozen steps back. But then, his whole body flew up like a spring compressed to the limit. Crow takes a plane. Bang! The chopping that relied on the whole body's strength and accumulated momentum for a long time was easily guided to one side by Luo Xian. It deviated from its original target and cut a deep mark on the road. Huaishur flipped in the air and blocked Luo Xian's fierce attack in a sorry state before landing on the ground. There's no need to use those random names as a cover, right? She stepped forward with a faint smile and pressed on step by step. If it's just this overlimit state, I learned it 7 years ago. This is called creativity. Huaishur turned back and spat out a mouthful of blood foam with many grass seeds. Under the broken wooden skin, the muscles of his arms were violently pulsating. His joints rubbed against each other and burst out thunder. It was as if his whole body had been ignited. Overlimit state. It was the first time Huaishur had heard of this name. This power came from the guidance of the mirror of nothingness, but the root of it was just a high-level application of the drummer and used steps. He was not surprised that Luo Xian could see through it. After extracting the blood of several Huaishur, he did not see any possibility of winning from the reflection of the mirror of nothingness. It was better to say that this possibility did not exist in the first place. A stage 3 against a stage 2 should be a one-sided beating. If the previous Huaishur could use his own ability, foundation, many trump cards, and even his own talent to make up for this flaw, then in front of an even greater talent, there was no doubt that his own talent would be like showing off in front of an expert. His opponent was Luo Xian. The reason he could be alive and kicking until now was entirely because Luo Xian had shown mercy and he had relied on chatting to buy time. After all, apart from her terrifying physical fitness and killing skills, she had not used the talent ability of the Sacred Mark. This was an opponent he had absolutely no chance of winning against. If he could still retain the terrifying power of the former Angel of Power, he could still have a good chance of winning. But where would he get this kind of Pokemon from? However, there was still a way to contend. In the end, Yu's steps and drummer were just a partial application of power. What if this application covered the whole body? If he let his whole body enter that kind of explosive state, wouldn't he be able to gain power like when he used to take drugs as a ghost? Although the price was a strong burden and destruction on his body, there was no need to worry about this with Hilghost's incredible HP recovery speed. At worst, it would be difficult to control the degree of erosion of the sacred mark, and he would become a Tran again. At this moment, Huaishur had completely forgotten the option of pulling out his sword and cutting his own throat to leave safely. He didn't want to escape, and he couldn't escape. If he retreated from here, Luo Xian's erosion would definitely completely enter an uncontrollable range. At that time, no matter what he did, there would be no saving him. He just wanted to buy time. It would be best if he could delay until the battle in the sky was over and there was a big shot from Dongxia who could reach out and help him. Buying time? I don't care. Luo Xian saw through his plan and still smiled. Or rather, I'm flattered that you're willing to play with me for a while. A real idol can't say no to their fans. Isn't this what you taught me? While twitching in pain, he squeezed out a hearty smile, clenched his sword again, and rushed toward the invincible enemy in front of him. The soles of his feet sank deeply into the broken road. It was as if he was wading through a quagmire. Every step he took was difficult. Even the air had turned into a viscous liquid, entangling his limbs. However, when he stomped his feet, a loud sound would be heard from the silent earth. Blood would splatter out from his arms, evaporating into blazing blood energy in the air. The mountain ghost roared. The dark green light rose from the vitality network under his feet and gathered in his body, supporting the continuous squandering. The sword and the axe fell, and the blade was swung. The long and short swords in Luo Xian's hands suddenly stagnated. Under the brutal suppression of Huaishur, they were no longer as light as before. They were evenly matched. Sure enough, my father was right. During the violent collision of the sword and the blade, Luo Xian looked at the cold and ferocious face in front of her and nodded approvingly. Although a person like you is destined to have no talent in creation, you may have other talents in application. Bang! The playing method of the sword, and the blade changed again. It extended from the changes in the melody of the G-string to fanaticism. The solemn meaning burst out from the heavy knocks of fate. The sword of virtue slashed horizontally and vertically. Together with the axe of wrath, they were swung out in a crisscross manner. From the burning without regard for his own safety, Huaishur stepped forward step by step, wielding the power beyond the limit. He advanced to a high speed that was difficult to reach in the past, and the iron light shone. Countless vines and thorns grew out from the cracks of the road under their feet all the time. But then, under the trampling of the crystal shoes, they silently withered into ashes. The color of blood covered the two swords from the red dress. The instant explosion carried a power that was enough to crush Huaishur to pieces, immune to poison, not afraid of ashes, and even had an explosive power that was enough to seriously injure Huaishur in an instant. The road of paradise seemed to be a natural restraint of Huaishur. Even Huaishur could feel that there was something more dangerous hidden behind Luo Xian's smile. Unexpectedly, Huaishur took a step back and dodged the short sword that suddenly changed direction and slashed in front of Huaishur's throat. Seizing the only gap, he attacked fiercely and suppressed Luo Xian again. Then, he dodged the blade that Luo Xian stabbed again. It was as if he had expected it. In Luo Xian's hands, every attack and plot hidden in the change of moves were seen through. He was so pure and sophisticated that he was not like the young man in her memory. Is it because of rapid progress, or is there another reason? Who knows? Maybe I'm a genius. Huaishur looked at the dozens of possibilities reflected interpreted and predicted in the mirror of nothingness, and said shamelessly. Chapter 287. If Elder Luo were here, he might praise Huai Shi for his shamelessness. He reminded Elder Luo of himself when he was young. But for Luo Xian, it didn't matter whether there was another reason or whether Huai Shi was a real genius. It didn't make any difference. On the contrary, she became even more excited. In this case, I don't need to go easy on you, right? The coldness brought by Luo Xian's smile suddenly rushed to the back of Huai Shi's head. The premonition of death spread wildly from his skull. In a moment of trance, Huai Shi's consciousness was almost subdued by the horrible killing intent. Then, she suddenly came in front of Huai Shi. Holding the dagger upside down, she stabbed toward Huai Shi's face. That movement was too gentle and smooth, so much so that it made people think that it was a gentle caress. But in reality, within that smooth movement, there was unmistakable killing intent, swift and fast. Even with the prediction of the mirror of nothingness, Huai Shi's face was almost scratched by this move. It was too fast. Her speed was so fast that he couldn't predict it. The moment the prediction came to his mind, she was already in front of him. Bang! The blade of the sword was parried. She didn't use any skills. She used the most violent way. Strength against strength. Blazing blood energy rose from Huai Shi's left arm. Wild power surged from his body, bringing him a burning pain and power that was close to thunder. Huai Shi roared, stepped forward, and forced Luo Xian to take a step back again. Luo Xian raised her eyebrows. She didn't expect that the combination of the Mountain Ghost's divine mark and the Ultra State could reach such an incredible level. The blade of the axe fell and violently set off a hurricane, tearing the ground under his feet. The crack stretched straight forward, dozens of meters in an instant, all the way to Luo Xian's feet. Using this power extravagantly, Huai Shi explored the upper limit of what he could accept. In an instant, he broke through the air. Muscles had their limits. Even if it was said that the power used by each person was only 1% of the power of their muscles, as long as the restraint was broken, they could erupt to a level that even they were afraid of. But there was still a limit. The Mountain Ghost's sacred marks level determined the existence of this upper limit. However, there was no such thing as a limit to origin substance itself. Ignoring each person's unique characteristics, the transformations between ranks, and the total amount of origin substance was a power that was born from one's soul and consciousness, which violated the very foundations of physics and thermodynamics. It was able to reach the level of subverting the three great seals of the present realm. As long as there were enough terrifying numbers, it was not impossible for the Creator to rewrite the world. This was where the drummer and used steps had broken through. Out of the thousands of origin substances in the world, it was one of the most closely connected to the physical body. Through the combination of pure skill and origin substance, it could help a person break through the limits of their physical strength and unleash destructive power that far exceeded their own. By endlessly absorbing the vitality of the surroundings, Huai Shi was able to convert a large amount of blood energy into blood energy, which was endlessly poured into the mirror of nothingness. Using this cheat-like power, she was able to master this technique a few years earlier than she would have been able to. At this moment, he could sense that as the origin substance continued to deplete, his own strength continued to increase. Step by step, he was destroying this damaged shell of a body. He was going to die. With the help of the mirror of nothingness, he was stingily and fully utilizing every tendon, every bone, and every joint. In the end, he was going to completely collapse. He was going to precisely die. Under this crazy operation, he could sense his lifespan rapidly decreasing, as if he was squandering his entire life's worth of strength in these short 10 minutes. No, Was there still 10 minutes left? How much time did he have left? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? Or 3 minutes? Before this false life was squandered away, how long would he be able to enjoy this kind of power that surpassed his limits? He had long since tossed this to the back of his mind. Come. The virtuous sword and the sacrificial blade rubbed against each other. Sparks flew, illuminating the mountain ghost's broken smile. A blazing light shot out from the crack in the youth's chest. He was burning, giving a performance to his fans. Time waits for no one, he muttered softly. Cherish this final meeting. The blade slashed down. Bang! In the roar, Luo Xian raised her arms. The long and short swords covered with cracks slashed out. Dozens of silver-white steel lights burned in the air. The broken arcs seemed to be engraved in the air. They tore through the hurricane and collided with the steel in Huaishi's hands. Sparks flew. The long sword shattered. Huaishi stepped on the sword and attacked fiercely, but Luo Xian took a step back, as if she had predicted this. As she stepped on the sword, an iron hammer flew from the ground and fell into her hand. As she swung it, it drew an arc in the air and collided with the blade of the axe again. A dazzling light flashed and disappeared. If I knew you were so strong, I wouldn't have waited so long. Luo Xian's expression became more and more cheerful. From the broken soul, the precipitate of the abyss danced wildly. It turned into pitch black and gushed out, almost swallowing Huaishi. The killing intent was bone-piercing. You know? From the collision of the sword and the blade, she stared at the youth in front of her and suddenly said, "Father, he wanted you to kill me." There are always people who have such unrealistic expectations of me. Huaishi slashed and retorted expressionlessly. From the beginning, I seem to have said that I didn't learn these things to kill anyone. What a joke. The collision of the metal burst out a sharp sound, but it couldn't suppress Luo Xian's laughter. Is there someone who learns how to kill for the world's peace? Maybe you don't want to believe. Huaishi couldn't help but sigh. I was just free at that time. I really like the way you say one thing and mean another. It's like you're saying sweet words. You can always deceive those girls who haven't seen it. In your plan, does it include me? Luo Xian chuckled and stepped forward, the weapons in her hands constantly changing with her footsteps. She was even empty-handed. Thunder, thunderclap, heavens fall, earth's sinkhole. She fiercely suppressed Huaishi. One punch. The axe in Huaishi's hand flew out and flew into the air. Before it landed, it dissipated and condensed again in Huaishi's hand, blocking the dagger she picked up from the ground. It almost pierced through the thick back of the axe, and the sharp edge was only a line away from Huaishi's pupils. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the cold light in front of him, without hesitation. Yes, that's the look in your eyes. Luo Xian's voice came from his ear like a whisper. With the step of the crystal shoe, she appeared behind Huaishi in a flash and whispered in his ear, "From the first time I saw you, I felt that we were the same person. We lived until now by killing something. Huaishi, if you want to live, you can only kill more." She smiled and stared at the side of the same kind, and told him, "We are all the same. Do you also have long magic hair?" Huaishi asked back, turned around, and slashed the sacrificial knife at her. "Do you have magic hands?" The blade of the axe slashed down. "Will there be any small animals that will talk to you?" The long spear swept across. "Will there be a little sister who will help you solve your problems like she helped me?" Boom! The angry blade pierced through the air, and the straight wind left a deep mark at the end of the distant street. Huaishi gasped, letting the blood fall from his face. He stared at Luo Xian, who had retreated into the distance, and told her word by word, "We are not the same. I am Huaishi, male, 17 years old, a high school student in Dongsha, a professional cellist. an action member of the astronomy club, the Prince of Paradise, a disaster musician, a trainee exorcist, a lot of titles. Huaishir raised his head and told her, I have a dream. I want to protect my family. I want to live on with my own efforts and make a name for myself. I want to live a respectable life. When I am 70 or 80 years old, I want to die happily with my wife, children, and grandchildren. It would be best if I could enter the card pool of some bullsh asterisk tea game and let people pay for me. I want to live. I want to live better. I want more people to be like me. So Huaishir stepped forward, slashed, and declared to Luo Xian, I am different from you. He used all his strength, stepped on the wind, and crushed the ground under his feet. He chased after Luo Xian's changing shadow and slashed the long sword, short knife, and axe in his hand with all his strength. This was a chord that gave his all. This was a peak that had yet to be reached. The burning source substance attached to the edge of the iron and burst out with a brilliance that could not be looked directly at. It was as if it was breathing with the iron. The power of the hand of confinement was exerted on every inch of the iron, causing the iron to burst out with a roar that echoed Huaishir. Luo Xian retreated and retreated again. At that moment, Huaishir widened his eyes in disbelief. In the reflection of the mirror of nothingness, he could not see her. He could only see that she was flying between the burning iron, circling, rising, and falling. She was unbelievably light. When she landed from the air, the tip of her feet touched the ground lightly, and her hands spread out gracefully. She was unharmed from the attack of the Xiang dragon. That was not an unexpected skill. She did not even use the speed that was superior to Huaishir's. Rather, it was more like a natural reaction, as if she was responding to a dance partner. She took light steps, maintaining the most reserved distance from the passionate pursuer, but also giving him a chance to get close to her. Huaishir looked at her in shock. He could not believe it, and almost ignored the pain that came from his limbs. Luo Xian tilted her head and looked at him with a mischievous smile. Ballet, haven't you seen it before? She tiptoed again and showed Huaishir the basic movements perfectly. Her eyes were drifting and focused. The song you chose to play just now, I've heard it before. It's Sheng Sang Swan, right? Huaishir was silent. He did not know how to respond. His rhythm had been completely seen through by her. No, maybe from the beginning, she did not take it seriously, as if she was just playing with him. I like ballet very much. Luo Xian said seriously, unfortunately, I only learned it for 2 days before my teacher chased me away. But before that, I learned Swan Lake. With a gentle smile on her face, she leaped from the pool of blood and spun around in a soundless rhythm. She turned around, stretched her slender legs and arms, and spun around lightly. It was as if she was dancing to a soundless melody. It was so beautiful. Finally, she turned around and looked at Huaishir. She asked softly, How is it? It's beautiful. Huaishir nodded. It's really as beautiful as a swan. That's right. She was like a swan dancing by a blood-red lake. It was a frightening color and a frightening scene, but with her around, everything seemed to become beautiful. Red Swan. It's not just ballet. I've also learned how to paint, sing, and even the violin. Luo Xian suddenly said, I've worked hard to learn, even if I didn't learn well, watching movies, listening to music, cooking, knitting sweaters, helping the elderly and children, donating to people in need, chasing stars, and falling in love. I've tried almost everything that can make people happy. She looked at the young man in front of her. Her smile had disappeared. But I've never experienced the kind of happiness you're talking about. Why is that? Huaishir? She took a step forward and solemnly stared into Huaishir's eyes. How can I be as happy as you? Yes, please tell me. What should I do to become happy? Please tell me. She said, no matter what you want, I can give it to you. Almost as if she was begging, she looked into Huaishi's eyes expectantly and begged for his mercy. Please tell me. Huaishi was silent. He looked at her pitifully, at her soul that was riddled with holes, and at the darkness that had swallowed her. Her lips opened, but she couldn't say anything. She could only remain silent. So Luo Xian lowered her eyes in understanding, as if she had expected it. You can't help it, right? Since she was born, she had been looking forward to being able to experience the things that others talked about, the happiness that was mentioned in the stories before school, the love that was mentioned in fairy tales, and the happiness that existed at the end of every story. But what was happiness? What was happiness? What was the so-called love? These things are all lies, right? As if she had finally understood, Luo Xian murmured in realization. Those were all lies. They were all lies. It was a lie that everyone had used to deceive her. Those were treasures that only others could show off to themselves. But she had nothing. After a long silence, Huaishi didn't dare to look into her eyes. He sighed helplessly. I'm sorry. Is that so? Luo Xian's eyes gradually turned cold. There was no enthusiasm and expectation. Gradually, they became as empty as an abyss. Why don't you leave? Huaishi, isn't the game over? She asked indifferently. You have never come here for the ranking. If you want to, you can leave here at any time, right? Why do you want to stay and play a game with a crazy woman? I wanted to run, but I didn't. Later, I didn't want to run anymore. Huaishi said, I want to save you. Luo Xian was stunned. In the silence, as if she had heard a great joke, she couldn't help but smile. Her heart shook, and she pulled her vocal cords to let out a mocking and mischievous laugh. She laughed loudly. So that's how it is. She seemed to finally understand what he had been trying to do in vain. But because of this, she felt even more incredulous. She felt even more absurd. You really are His Royal Highness. Why, sure. She whispered softly. She raised her eyes and looked at the youth in front of her. She revealed a sinister and deathly stillness that was like the essence of the abyss. Countless drops of blood were turbulent because of the sound of thunder in the distance. The silence on the broken street was torn apart. The piles of corpses fell apart under the impact. The curtain of blood rain was shaken and rolled in all directions. A sharp shadow emerged from the end of the blood rain. It whistled and condensed its own form from nothingness. It came under the trampling of the crystal shoes. Under the light of the dark green candlelight, the withered and shriveled huge pumpkin was soaked in blood. Under the pull of the skeleton horse, the 6 huge wheels crushed the earth, bursting with thunder. Under Cinderella's prayer, the pumpkin carriage from the nightmare reappeared in this hell, bringing with it a chilling aura. Then please dance with me, His Royal Highness. Luo Xian stretched out her hand and stroked the skeleton horse's face. She turned back and invited Huaishi in the distance, just like you standing on the stage at that time, shining as if you could save everyone. Please dance with me. So, she boarded the carriage of death and cast a final cold glance at Huaishi. But I love you deeply. So, the skeleton horse neighed. There was a blood-colored flame rising above the carriage, forming a substantial fierceness and violence. Regardless of its own power and madness, the miracle of the road of paradise was awakened. It spat out the breath of death at Huaishi ferociously. The love of the abyss was entrusted to it. In the silence, Huaishi sighed, pulled out the sword of virtue, and slashed. The iron hooves trampled on the broken road. The white horse returned from the void again and neighed. When it saw Cinderella in the carriage in the distance, it couldn't help but take a step back and snorted at Huaishur unhappily. It stared at Huaishur with a pair of eyes. "Why do you always provoke such troublesome opponents?" "Yeah." Huaishur scratched his head. "Why do I always encounter such troublesome enemies?" After thinking about it, there seemed to be only one reason. Probably this world was not good to him. But compared to others, wasn't he lucky? He hadn't fallen yet. He hadn't ushered in the suffering, torture, and devastation that he couldn't bear. He hadn't been taken away by unreasonable and sudden death, and he hadn't been obliterated by this world. He was still alive, could still get up, and could still continue to move forward. So, what excuse could he have to complain? Now, the bitter water had been poured out, and he hadn't died yet. So, he couldn't give up here. "I'm going to perform my duties as a prince." Huaishur looked at the white horse and asked with a smile, "Can you do me a favor?" The white horse stared at him, not knowing whether it was angry or depressed. Soon it snorted. After snorting twice, it proudly puffed out its chest, indicating that he should hurry up and not dawdle. It was naturally very handsome. Huaishur grinned, got on the horse, and looked at the figure in the darkness on the carriage. "Are you ready, Your Highness?" The Prince of Paradise held the reins and sword in his hand and softly announced, "I'm going." In front of the blood-colored carriage, the two skeleton war horses neighed unhappily and roared silently. In the darkness on the carriage, there seemed to be a happy smile. "Only you can bring me such joy. Huaishur." Luo Xian raised her hand, and a painful flame appeared in the ashes, covering the entire carriage. The power of the road of paradise traveled here and showed in her hand, placing a huge force on this chariot. She stared at Huaishur's face, waiting for his final performance, the last trace of joy that she could seek. "Come, Your Highness. Please bring me my last happiness." Chapter 288. In the dead silence, everything seemed to be frozen. The rain of blood that fell from the sky was infected by the frost that soared into the sky. It stopped in the cold wind, and the world fell into a solemn silence. Only the roars and loud noises from the sky could be heard. When the dazzling flash of light flashed from the sky, a sharp and ear-piercing collision sound came from the crack in the blood-red sky. The world was trembling violently before this mighty force that came out of nowhere. Then, the dark clouds shattered, and endless light spewed out from the sky. Countless flesh and blood grew like trees, and the hands of the premature child struggled to grab the crack in the sky. It was as if it couldn't wait to give birth. But was it the cry of joy of birth, or the cry of pain and sorrow of death? No one could say for sure whether the mournful cry was filled with joy and despair. Soon after, a huge broken body fell from the sky, burning and crushing the collapsed clouds, emitting a radiance of aging and despair. It was the sun. The sun was falling, because the eternal night was coming. "Come, Luo Xian." Huaishur clenched the hilt of his sword and whispered softly, "I will bet everything I have." At that moment, the white horse bathed in blood followed the prince's roar and stomped its iron hooves. It followed the last light and charged towards the enemy. The sword was raised, leading the last light to cut the darkness in front of it. He turned his back to the mournful sun and moved forward. His figure seemed to be melting in the brilliant and mournful sun, like the prince, shining. Countless afterlights that fell on the ground seemed to be disturbed by the horse's movement. They flew up like fireflies, followed the light, flew into the sky, and disappeared into the darkness. "It's so dazzling, Prince." Luo Xian stared at the burning light, not knowing whether it was longing or anger. She just smiled and whispered softly, "Please save me, Your Highness." The darkness roared. From the rolling darkness, the ferocious pumpkin carriage shook violently and roared forward. The rain of blood rolled up against gravity and flew towards the sky. The mournful red wriggled and embellished the spreading darkness. The power overflowing from Luo Xian's shattered soul erupted and finally broke through the invisible barrier. They retracted the fog of pain that engulfed everything and condensed into a tangible form. Spreading its wings, its iron-like scales spread open, reflecting the last rays of the scorching sun. It roared towards the sky, tyrannically suppressing all the noise in this furious cry. This was the despair and pain accumulated from 24 years of waiting, the disaster and miracle born from the soul from the abyss. Just a brief glimpse of it was enough to cause countless Chaos Abyss groups to submit to its terrifying might. Even the embryo of disaster that was still in the process of being born was enough to terrify all spectators. That was a dragon, the dark demonic dragon. At this moment, it wasn't just the audience in front of their screens. Even the Harkon's eyelids couldn't help but twitch wildly. Just his soul alone can cause a qualitative change in the mystic dragon. Isn't this talent a little too exaggerated? The Harkon scratched his face in frustration. For the first time, he felt that his job as a commentator wasn't easy. He couldn't help but sigh when he turned around to look at Bai Zhe. Do you think he can win? Bai Zhe turned around to look at him, as if she was looking at an idiot. Do you even need to ask? She concluded regretfully, he'll definitely lose. As a divine beast who could directly observe the countless branches of history, she had already seen the only inevitable result among the hundreds of thousands of different branches. It was an ending that no amount of luck or wisdom could change. Bai Zhe sighed, softly as if she was admiring Roland. He's dead for sure. At this moment, as the carriage rumbled forward, the demonic dragon's shadow flapped its wings, sweeping up a hurricane and a rain of blood. It destroyed the ground, dark clouds, sky, and all other insignificant dust in front of it. Carrying this heavy love for the Chaos Abyss, it opened its mouth and poured its heart out to the prince in front of it. It roared without restraint. Terrifying waves of origin substance gathered in the dragon's throat. Pain and despair rubbed against each other, creating dazzling sparks. Immediately after, as the roar shook the heavens and earth, white flames appeared from the depths of the darkness. They swept forward like a flood, swallowing up the last radiance of the setting sun. The dragon's flames burned brightly and rushed forward. At that moment, the white horse leapt into the air. It neighed and galloped in the wind, its long mane fluttering like a flag. Don't walk gently into the good night. Huaisher gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, but a poem from the Chaos Abyss suddenly appeared in his mind. Old age should burn and roar at sunset. Roar, roar, denounce the retreat of the light. Denounce the disappearance of the light. At that moment, the sword of virtue vibrated slightly. As Huaisher silently chanted, it burst forth with a roar of steel. The mountain ghost's sacred mark suddenly extended into thousands of strands, sinking into the countless ancient inscriptions on the inside of the sword hilt. The surging vitality transformed into a pure glow, adhering to the blade. It was like a glimmer of hope at dawn. With all my soul dedicated to this sword, virtue will exist with our legend. As countless people chanted solemnly in a trance, Huaisher raised his arm, revealing the brilliant light on the blade in front of the self-destructive dragon's flames. Compared to the generosity and solemnity of the past, what appeared now was just a tiny thread. But it burned stubbornly. Even if the dragon's flames swept over, it still did not extinguish. There was no difference between great and small virtue, and there was no difference between many and lonely virtue. Even if it could not change any of the pain and despair in reality, it was still enough to reflect the existence of hope. Just existing here was enough to illuminate the long road ahead. Here, it announced the arrival of dawn. Huaishe roared and slashed down the blade. The vast and long night ends here. Compared to the previous world-shaking torrent, Huaishe's hand only had a thread of remnant light. But even if it was just a thread of remnant light, as the blade slashed down, it burst forth with a tearing dragon's roar. The light that cut through the darkness flashed and disappeared. But the endless dragon's flames were like a flood parting to the sides under the slash of the blade. The raging sea was opened up under the solemn and mighty blade. The sea was divided. Huaishe moved forward like a hot knife through butter. The demon dragon roared angrily, roaring at Huaishe. But the white horse raised its iron hooves and trampled on its face, crushing the pitch-black scales. Ignoring the remaining flames, the white horse broke through the demon dragon's illusion and forced its way into the endless deep darkness. Huaishe raised the blade again and launched an irresistible attack at the carriage in front of him. The crown of paradise appeared on top of his head. The light tore through the squirming darkness and stung the reflected eye in the distant space. It announced the arrival of the prince. The darkness hissed and collided with the last remnant light. An ear-piercing screech erupted. Countless blood rain splashed in all directions. As the thread of light moved forward, and forward, Huaishe's roar penetrated into the depths of the darkness. "I'm coming to save you, Luo Xian." On the burning white horse, the mountain ghost roared. He exerted all his strength to break through the last barrier and stabbed the blade at Luo Xian in the darkness. The lonely princess raised her eyes, which were bloodshot and ferocious. In the next moment, the white horse and the chariot passed by each other. In the dead silence, there was only the sound of falling apart. The outcome had been decided. As the blood rain splashed again, it fell on the ground like tears. The galloping chariot came to an abrupt stop. "What a pity, Huaishe!" In the carriage, the princess in the darkness looked back with disappointment. "You can't save anyone." A line of blood dripped from the blade in her hand. In the quiet street, the running white horse suddenly staggered, took 2 steps forward with difficulty, and knelt on the ground powerlessly, raising a cloud of dust. The color of blood spread out from its body. It turned its head with difficulty and gently licked the prince's broken face with praise and pity. "Don't blame yourself, Your Highness. At least you fought to the last moment." Its figure gradually became illusory and dissipated silently. Huaishe fell in the dust, and a pool of blood spread out from under him. The sound of shattering sounded from the depths of his body, one after another, heralding the arrival of death. He lost. Is it over like this? Luo Xian quietly stared at the back for a long, long time until the last hope in her lowered eyes dissipated. The soul that was on the verge of its limit made a cracking sound. The endless darkness surged and finally opened a crack that led to somewhere. Those faint calls sounded again, as if they were whispering in his ears. It was so clear. In the surging darkness, blurry phantoms slowly emerged from it, respectfully prostrating on the ground, quietly waiting for her return. "Did you come to pick me up?" Luo Xian asked softly. Then a slender figure rose from the crack of nothingness. A cold and tyrannical majesty showed a crack from the distant abyss. It reached out its palm to her, with salvation and grace from the abyss. It waited for her response. It led her to the paradise that truly belonged to her. This was the reunion after a long separation, the return after 24 years. "Wait a minute." A discordant voice sounded from the warm reunion of the abyss, ruining the atmosphere. "It's not over yet." The embarrassed young man who fell in the blood made a sound. He reached out to Luo Xian with difficulty and told her, "I am still alive. Luo Xian turned her head and saw him stiffly propping up his body, falling to the ground again, climbing up again, crawling forward like a dog. He approached her inch by inch. "Not dead yet," she whispered softly, and then fell into confusion. No, he should have died long ago, right? She couldn't hear the rhythm of his steps, nor the low sound of his heartbeat. But as the pair of empty eyes looked up, the broken body propped up its arms and climbed up from the ground again, almost inconceivably. She didn't have the slightest doubt about her ability. As early as the moment they passed each other, Huaisher should have died. But what was it that was left there? Was it a stubborn obsession, a consciousness that hadn't dissipated, or a broken soul? No matter what it was very unpleasant. He was like a shameless sticky candy, sticking to her body. After facing so many rejections and setbacks, he still kept pestering her. Why was he so shameless? "Wait a minute," Huaisher murmured hollowly. "I'm coming soon." Why was he still alive? Even Huaisher himself didn't know. He forgot who he was, where he was, and even what he was doing. He just tried very hard to live, trying to get up from the ground, propping up his numb body, and stumbling forward, just like he had done countless times in the past. But he couldn't find where his target was. He didn't even know if what he was doing had any meaning. For some reason, in a trance, he seemed to hear a familiar voice. "When the time comes, will you still treat monsters like us as equals? Huaisher, will you save innocent people?" The distant voice asked softly, with pity and expectation, eager for his answer. "Will you still uphold justice and extend a helping hand to those who ask for help like you? Even if the world was not good to you, even if many times you couldn't do anything about it and found that you couldn't do anything, even if everything you did was in vain. Huaisher, will you still become a hero?" "That's, of course." Huaisher roared with all his strength, stirring up his broken lungs, and used all his strength to answer the voice. He endured the pain that made him want to cry, and took a step forward awkwardly. Another step. "Don't be afraid. Luo Xian, I'm coming." He reached out to the darkness, wanting to touch the distant shadow. As if abandoned by the whole world, she stood alone in the deepest part of the darkness. Her dark pupils reflected the appearance of hell, silent without any ripples. She was so lonely, as if she was about to leave the world. Huaisher opened his mouth and wanted to speak, but he couldn't make a sound. He had a lot to say to Luo Xian, but he couldn't say it. He wanted to tell her, "Don't go. Don't go to the abyss. Please stay in the human world. Don't become a monster. Don't lose yourself. Please don't be afraid." Staring at her cheek that was close at hand, Huaisher opened his mouth with difficulty, used the last of his strength, raised his hands, and gently hugged her. Luo Xian was stunned. She could feel the warmth fading away. She raised her eyes and stared blankly at Huaisher's broken face. However, she saw a final smile on that dirty face with much difficulty. "I'm here to save you, Your Highness." In the shadow under his feet, the ghost that had been waiting for a long time rose up, used the last bit of origin form, clenched the sword of virtue in his hand, and stabbed forward. It pierced through Huaisher's back and into Luo Xian's chest. A gentle glow lit up from the blade. It flashed and disappeared without a trace. "Is this all you can do?" Luo Xian looked at the broken face in confusion, full of confusion. Would this kind of trick be useful? It couldn't be said to be novel or even strange. At best, it was just a trick to perish together. But Huaisher's remaining strength was not even enough to pierce her heart. A futile last struggle. It was meaningless. At that moment, the darkness exploded. Luo Xian froze in place, looked down in disbelief, and saw the blood flowing out of the wound on her chest. Intense pain. But this unprecedented pain was different from the past. It was clearer, more real, and more unbearable. Even though the wound was only a shallow line, under this almost dust-like wound, the demon dragon's tragic wail rang out in her broken soul. The divine mark shook violently, but then it fell apart along with the darkness, because something had arrived. It had descended on her body. Behind her, the crack that led to the abyss shook violently, and countless blurry figures screamed angrily, desperately flying over, wanting to break through the last barrier. But as the darkness trembled, it became more and more erratic, and then quickly dissipated. She froze in place. She felt an unbearable pain explode in her heart, and for some reason, she couldn't help but feel afraid. It was as if, in the hollow of her soul, something had sprouted, and then bore fruit. The fruit fell from the branch, returning to the dry soil. It brought a fleeting sweetness and an unprecedented sense of loss and satisfaction. It was too contradictory, too strange, and too frightening. He clearly wanted to get it again, but he wanted to pay more than he could get it. He clearly wanted to possess it again, but he wanted to give more than he could take it. After a drop of water fell, it set off a huge wave, swallowing everything that had once been. In the long emptiness, the first thing she felt was loss and confusion, and then, in the spread of gentleness, she felt the so-called gentleness, pity, and sympathy. In the midst of despair, she felt the happiness of a mirage. Finally, in the midst of sadness and bitterness, she felt the joy and happiness that made her afraid. It was unbelievable and completely incomprehensible. What is this? When she came back to her senses, she was already sitting in the dust, and she couldn't bear this cruel torture anymore. She choked, couldn't help but cry, and screamed, "What is this?" "Silly child." Huaisher raised his hand, wiped the dust on her face, and told her gently, "Of course, it is love." In this cruel world, other than love, was there anything else that could beat killing and death? In front of his chest, where his heart was pierced and torn by the blade, there was a last weak glow, so gentle, so quiet. This is what you yearned for, Luo Xian, the last origin substance that was transformed by the hand of imprisonment, the glow that was born from the pain, and despair that was tempered by the pain and despair. Pure love, giving without asking for anything, offering without hurting anyone, saving without asking for anything in return, and saving without waiting for gratitude. Luo Xian raised her head sluggishly, her lips trembling. For the first time, she felt the warmth of the hand on her cheek, as well as the joy and relief in the youth's smile. Too despicable. Huaisher, you actually dared to sneak attack me. She raised her head, resisting the urge to cry, and gasped for breath. Can't you act like a prince for once? I'm sorry, princess. Huaisher laughed regretfully. Times have changed. Now that shameless and vulgar prince persona is more popular. It's because of this that you can't find a girlfriend. Luo Xian choked, but she could no longer restrain the sadness and joy in her heart. She hugged the youth in front of her tightly and cried out miserably, just like a child. She finally found her way home. Tears slid down her cheeks, washing away the dust, and fell into Huaisher's palm. It was like dew falling into the desert. In a trance, Huaisher seemed to see the darkness behind Luo Xian constantly collapsing, and in the deepest part of the darkness, there was a dignified silhouette that was gradually dissipating. The moment before she left, she cast an indifferent glance at Huaisher. It was unknown whether it was praise or anger. Immediately after, she disappeared into the collapsing crack, never to be seen again. It seems I won. Huaisher forced a smile, closed his eyes, and fell on his back. In the unbearable drowsiness and dizziness, he finally welcomed the embrace of death. This was the result of this battle. The prince saved the princess. Love triumphed over everything. Chapter 289. Even if it's a fairy tale, love is too ridiculous, isn't it? Outside the sky of Yamatai, in the sea of the abyss, the shadow of a huge bird made a flying boat. On the back of the shadow, a 3-meter-tall giant man sat cross-legged beside a pile of empty cans. He opened a can of beer, raised his head and gulped it down. He wiped his mouth and said, "It feels like a cartoon." In silence, Xian Niao slowly put down the index finger that he had raised for a long time. He watched the young man turn into a white light and fly out of Yamatai. He couldn't help but chuckle. "Isn't this good?" The old man asked happily. "It's good, but I really don't understand." Quafu scratched his head and was confused. "I've seen Xiaoxian's problem. Wasn't the Liberator's dust ineffective? If it's useful, I can borrow Cupid's arrow from Rome." Xian Niao looked at him for a long time with pity and sighed helplessly. "Finally, I know why you haven't married yet." Quafu was stunned for a long time, and countless question marks appeared on his head. What does this have to do with me not being married and not being able to find a girlfriend? Old man, don't look down on people. Xian Niao shook his head helplessly and sighed. That young man's soul power is indeed the transformation of source form and iron. He turned his love into iron and attached it to the blade of the sword. With the sword of self-sacrifice, he made up for Xiaoxian's lack as a human so that she could reject the abyss and not be a monster. From this point of view, there were indeed some problems with our way of doing things. As he said, the old man raised his finger and looked solemn. "But you ignored the most important point." "What?" Quafu was confused. "Love is a mutual thing." Xian Niao stared at him with disappointment. "You can't accept someone who suddenly says he loves you, right?" Quafu wanted to say that he could, but he didn't want to be thrown out by the old man, so he could only shut up. Xian Niao knew what this silly guy was thinking. He didn't even want to be angry with him. This boorish guy who only knew how to chop and chop deserved to be alone all his life. He finally knew what happened to Quafu at the annual Social Security Bureau Fellowship Party. Quafu scratched his head and thought for a while. Then he suddenly understood. "You mean Xiaoxian likes that guy?" The old man couldn't help but roll his eyes. "Whether he likes her or not is another matter. At least Xiaoxian is willing to turn from a monster into a human for him, which is a great improvement. That child has finally experienced the beauty of being born a human." He paused for a moment as he recalled the scene he had seen through the eye of Xing Jianji. He felt a headache coming on. But that kid is about to be wrapped up by the red thread. From the age of 18, rotten peach blossoms would continue all the way until they were 90 years old. Putting aside whether they were scum or not, no matter how one looked at it, they didn't seem like a good match. He would have to think about it later. And, as if it had eyes on the back of its head, Mystic Bird suddenly said, "Minors are not allowed to drink." Behind the empty jar, Zhu Qingyu pulled his hand away from the pile of beer, as if he had been electrocuted, and pretended to feed the pigeons. "What are you afraid of?" Quafu asked carelessly. "Minors can kill and set fires, but they can't smoke and drink? In my opinion, ascenders aren't afraid of alcohol, so there's nothing wrong with drinking less." Mystic Bird squinted at him. "Sorry, I didn't say anything." Quafu wisely averted his gaze, pretending that nothing had happened. Mystic Bird sighed. Dealing with this group of problematic children, he felt like he would one day have a brain hemorrhage. Thankfully, there were still children who didn't need to worry about them. Boom! A massive explosion sounded out from within Yamatai City. The three people on the illusory image glanced at each other, and an expression of understanding appeared on their faces. To be able to last this long against a level 5 cultivator at the 4th level, even with the white wolf hook in his hand, it's not easy, Quafu said as he rubbed the stubble on his chin. "This girl is getting more and more powerful." Mystic Bird understood this clearly. A badly damaged son, and a child who died prematurely in the womb. Even if they were pieced together, they would only be a deformed, stitched monster. They are still far from being able to carry out heaven's might on behalf of a level 5 cultivator. But no matter what, that child Shueya has worked hard. He paused for a moment, then suddenly said, "It should be about time, right?" At the same time, at the border of the Yellow Springs, in the cold hall guarded by countless red spider lilies, a helpless sigh came from below the royal stairs. The left minister lowered his eyebrows, and a trace of worry appeared on his handsome face, making people feel pity for him. The situation had indeed become so bad that it could not be salvaged. The last effort had failed. Behind the curtain above the royal stairs, in the solemn darkness, a terrified voice came. It was as young as a child, and it was so flustered. What should we do? Since it has come to this, we can only ask Lord Gongfang to act, right? The left minister lowered his head and respectfully prostrated himself on the ground. "Your Majesty, please endure the humiliation for the time being and wait for the right time." "You mean?" "General." His Majesty behind the curtain was stunned, as if he was grabbing onto the last straw, but at the same time he felt a wave of unease and fear. Ever since the balance between the Gongfang family and the Wu family was broken 90 years ago, who would not be afraid of this name? Even the emperor, who was high above in tradition, could no longer keep the tyrannical Gongfang in check. The funny thing was that the name Gongfang was used to refer to the ruler of Yingzhou, the emperor, who was as noble as the sky. Now, when everyone mentioned this name, what appeared in their minds was the dark figure that brought fear to countless people. Gongfang of the Ghost. It meant that the ruler was like the ferocious giant ghost in the legend, fierce, tyrannical, powerful, and at the same time invincible. In Yingzhou, ghosts did not refer to invisible ghosts or the souls of the dead, but terrifying creatures that were beyond the reach of human beings, such as Zhou Tun, who was transformed by the tyrannical mountain god, and Ibaraki, who was transformed by the fallen dragon god. They were the nightmares formed by the ruler who was high above after he fell into the devil, monsters that no mortal could resist even if they used all their strength. Over the past 90 years, the general who had descended from the sky had crushed the rebels who had overestimated themselves time and time again with a terrifying smile. He had seized the authority of today by force, subverted the traditions, trampled on the ethics, and stepped on the bones of countless people to become one of the real dominators of Yingzhou. If it were not for the support of so many families and the inheritance of the Yingzhou genealogy, the current emperor would probably be a joke. A human-shaped seal, a ridiculous decoration. He could replace it at any time. At this moment, when he was suddenly mentioned, the voice behind the curtain became more and more panicked. Why is it like this?" the emperor asked. "Didn't the minister of the left say that it was foolproof?" "The variables are unpredictable." The minister of the left knelt down and kowtowed. "It was my mistake." "Mistake." A hoarse voice came from outside the hall. The burly old man strode into the hall. His hair and beard were standing on end, and his big nose on his sallow face was burning red with anger. "Just because of your miscalculation, you want His Majesty to bow his head to a martial artist who doesn't know etiquette? Don't you know that the emperor is humiliated by the emperor? Now that the imperial power is weak, if you show weakness so easily, can the minister of the left bear the consequences?" As he spoke, the minister of the right remonstrated with a pair of huge eyes, looking at the figure on the steps. "Your Majesty, you can't do this." "Right, minister of the right." The emperor could not believe it. "Why did you come back?" "If I didn't come back, your Majesty would have been deceived by that scoundrel and made a huge mistake." The minister of the right's breathing was chaotic, and the dust on his clothes had not been washed off. It was as if he had rushed back and did not even wash up before rushing into the hall. Your Majesty is the ruler of the country. You can't bow down to that martial artist over such a small matter. The child behind the curtain was stunned for a long time, still unable to make a decision. But the Sun Shamans, does your Majesty still not understand? The right minister suddenly roared, rudely interrupting the emperor's words. His angry voice was almost uncontrollable. The plan of planting sun shamans in Yamatai City is nothing more than a daydream to attract the favor of the emperor. We should not have placed our hopes on luck. If we don't cut off our wrists now, are we trying to break a rock with an egg and start a war with Doomsday? Isn't this following the wishes of that barbarian? If he has your Majesty's permission, how can he not do whatever he wants? We may have suffered great losses, but at the end of the day, it's just a border, the remains of a child who died prematurely, and a few sun shaman sage stones. Why can't your Majesty see this clearly? No, it's not just that. After a long silence, the emperor on the steps said in a low voice, I left my mother behind. The minister of the right was stunned, as if he had been struck by lightning. Your Majesty, don't tell me you. As if he had finally thought of the worst possibility, he stared at the figure behind the curtain in disbelief. His face turned pale, and he almost couldn't stand still. Don't tell me you even used the things left behind by the previous emperor? The emperor nodded his head timidly. In the dead silence, the minister of the right staggered back 2 steps, raised his trembling finger, and pointed at the minister of the left, who had his back facing him. Then he pointed at the emperor's figure and opened his mouth several times. His face turned red, and in the end, he collapsed on the ground without any strength left. Only a single tear flowed from the corner of his eye. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his eyes were bloodshot and ferocious. He pulled out his sword and charged at the minister of the left. Traitor Wang, this old man will get rid of you today, you scourge. At that moment, he saw the minister of the left raise his head, and a mocking smile appeared on his face. After a quarter of an hour, the tightly shut doors of the palace opened again. The old man with a dull expression fell to the ground. Unconscious, the palace servants who had been summoned hurriedly sent him out of the palace. Until he fainted, he still held the broken sword in his hand. There was a line of blood on the broken edge of the sword. It was like a tear. The minister of the right is already old and cannot understand your Majesty's ambition to revitalize Tianjin. It is truly distressing to have such a lack of decorum in front of the emperor. The minister of the left knelt on the ground and begged bitterly, Your Majesty, please be merciful and let the minister of the right return to his hometown and live out his life in peace. Is that so? The young figure on the royal stairs finally reacted from the terrifying struggle just now and nodded in panic. It's okay. I cough. I can also understand the minister of the right's painstaking efforts. Then I will reward you heavily. Your Majesty is merciful. The minister of the left respectfully praised. Your Majesty, please make a decision soon. After a long silence, the figure on the royal stairs suppressed the panic in his heart and finally made a decision. Someone bring my imperial seal. Chapter 290. The sun, weary, gently bid farewell to the sea. Amidst the wails that shook the entire Yamatai city, a hoarse, singing voice could be heard. At this moment, you confess that your love is no longer there. Following Yi Shuiya's song, the white wolf silently ran, flashing through the air. From the shattered central area, a mournful waterfall soared into the sky. The falling sun let out its final tragic cry. Inside the scorched black pit, the blood-red sun was cut open. The mournful sunlight gushed out like blood, scattering in all directions. Bit by bit, it was so viscous. Under the layers of light, there were pieces of wriggling flesh. The dead child of premature death was still waving its dozens of tentacles. Its purplish-black flesh and blood took root and sprouted in the soil, spreading rapidly. Then he died quickly. In the end, under the gradually extinguishing sunlight, a sarcoma as large as a mountain was revealed, and in the flesh that was cut open from the middle, there was a giant eye formed from countless deformed compound eyes. The countless black compound eyes reflected the same face, and the countless lips of the same face opened and closed, humming the same song. In her hand, the white wolf hook was raised and stabbed forward. Noiselessly, it entered the center of his eyes. Blood flowed, like a waterfall, completely dyeing Yi Shuiya red. Separated by the white wolf hook, the last trace of malevolence firmly stared at Yi Shuiya's appearance. He wanted to plant the most vicious curse. "Don't be sad," Yi Shuiya grinned and turned his head indifferently. He flicked the lighter and lit the cigarette at the corner of his mouth. If there was only the sun in the sky, how lonely would that be? Don't you think so? Her once pretty face was now covered in cracks. Purplish black blood seeped out from her cracked facial features, making her look extremely ferocious. It was impossible to tell who was the evil spirit. Amidst the smile, the flesh and blood of the prematurely dead child suddenly convulsed crazily. Then it completely stiffened and condensed into a pitch-black stone. Huge cracks spread out from the petrified eyes, and they fell apart. A tragic wail that resounded throughout the world spread in all directions, even reaching the depths of the abyss. The child that had died prematurely in the womb finally welcomed the complete annihilation. As for Yi Shuiya, he was already limp on the ground, having lost all his strength. She won, but he didn't feel happy. The broken sun shaman stigmata slowly rose from the wreckage, condensing into a solemn and broken glass sun disk in the air. It seemed to want to break through the air, but under the deterrence of the white wolf hook, it was frozen in place, unable to move. The child who died prematurely had died, and the sun shaman's sacred mark lost the soil that nurtured it. The purplish-black glazed sun continued to tremble, and countless tiny cracks appeared on it. Without a stable foundation, there was a possibility of it collapsing at any time. What was worse was that with the loss of its vitality, it was no longer able to maintain its sublimation state. Instead, it gradually lost its power and returned to its original solidified state. It was like a tree without roots. Even if it had sprouted new branches, it still couldn't stop itself from rotting and dying. 10 years of hard work from the Ingzhou Genealogy Institute was quickly fading away. It's been beaten back to its original state. How tragic! Yi Shuiya leaned against the ruins, tilting her head as she scrutinized its gradually dilapidated appearance. Not only did she feel pity or indifference, her tone didn't fluctuate at all. She just quietly smoked, humming an ancient song from the Russian Federation. The sun's face is tired, gently bidding farewell to the sea. It's at this moment that you finally confess love is no longer here. The sun, the tired sun, had set. A crisp, cracking sound came from her body. That was the sound of the sacred mark shattering. The Big Dipper dimmed. The power of forced advancement quickly faded, dragging her soul along with it as it fell apart. Therefore, she pinched the burnt cigarette between her fingers and smiled. "Don't be afraid. I'm the same." The sun shaman's glazed light disc sensed danger. The cracked sun disc trembled, wailed, and wanted to escape. But under the gaze of the white wolf illusion, no matter how it flew, it couldn't break past 10 meters. The cold light of the silver hooks crisscrossed on the ground, drawing a circle on the ground. The white wolf illusion with the Tao. It will swim. The talisman has changed. It is the spirit hook. From the collapse of the sacred mark, Yishueya raised the white light in her hand. Her pale face was illuminated, contrasting with the blood oozing out of her mouth and nose. It became even more vivid. Just like that, she scrutinized this divine tool formed by the divine mark. She finally made up her mind and chanted the final ending. Weda is suitable, out of Een to Sizhou. In that instant, representing the reincarnation of the heavens, the divine mark that indicated the change of the country's fate, pierced into Yishueya's heart, pierced into the turbulent Big Dipper. In the next moment, the 9 obvious and 2 hidden stars fell apart. In the wailing and twitching of the soul, the Big Dipper's sacred mark fiercely contracted, trembled, and finally completely turned into chaos. Following the division of the white wolf hook, the sacred mark shattered. A cyan-blue giant ape phantom flew out from Yishueya's body, and the phantom of the moon fox of heart reappeared behind her. This was a completely unbelievable scene. Under the divine mark of the white wolf hook, Yishueya's Big Dipper, that was originally fused into one, was unexpectedly cut back to its original state. The ginseng water ape that was fused into the soul was stripped out, completely, without any residual or future troubles. Yishueya was forcefully demoted. No, it would be better to say, it was like the system was reverting back to its original state, as if time was reversing itself, returning to the peak of the 3rd level. This was the true power of the white wolf hook. As the master of the Eastern Summer genealogy, did the black bird really need to make a move at any time? The answer was that it did not need to. As the symbol of the Eastern Summer genealogy, the one who was in charge of the Eastern Summer genealogy, when did it need to be like the twin flower red staff charging at the front and retreating at the back? As long as it stood there, it was enough to represent the Eastern Summer genealogy itself. Its words could represent the views and opinions of all the Eastern Summer genealogy's ascendants. As long as it raised its finger, there would be 100,000 Eastern Summer genealogy's ascendants brandishing their weapons from Penglai Road to the southern Heavenly Gate pedestrian street. After cutting it down, they would cut it back again. If it was necessary, they could even repeat this 5, 6, 7, 8 times, until it nodded, and said that it was okay. They had washed themselves clean. As the blackbird's personal weapon, the white wolf hook was a divine mark extracted from history and miracles, standing side by side with the bloodshed scroll and the other 2 divine marks. Its true power was not to go out and fight to the death, but rather the authority and prestige of the blackbird as the master of the Eastern Summer genealogy. In the hands of its true master, the blackbird, it did not even need to be unsheathed. As long as the old man glanced at it, it could instantly reduce an Eastern Summer genealogy's ascendant from the 5th level to the blank board. After the blackbird inherited the position of the master of the Eastern Summer genealogy, it rarely used this supreme authority. It had not even been used on rebels. Those who dared to stab it were all casually crushed to death by the old man. Most of the time, it was used as a reloader, helping the juniors who failed to advance to return to their original state, accumulating experience and starting over again. Just like now, as his rank fell, countless blood spurted out from his pores in an instant. Yishueya's entire body was dyed red. For a 4th level ascendant, it could be considered a heavy injury, but for a 3rd level ascendant, it was a death sentence. If it was not for the white wolf spirit protecting Yi Shuya, she might have died on the spot. You see, I said before, we are all the same. She endured the twitching pain and raised her head. Her bloodshot eyes stared at the Sun Witch's stigmata in front of her, still smiling. Only, you need a little help. Amidst the sorrowful cry of the Sun Witch's stigmata, she staggered up and walked forward step by step. From the void behind her, the Heart Moon Fox's long tail stretched out, its hair standing on end. Its eyes lit up with the light of a predator, challenging the person above it. It was already so hungry that it could not be choosy. Until now, how could the audience not understand what this madwoman wanted to do? The entire Yamatai city was the stage that the Eastern Summer family had carefully built for Yi Shuya, here to show the world the spirit of the strongest in the Eastern Summer's new generation. After experiencing an advancement, she wanted to abandon Big Dipper and once again challenge the fourth level, advance towards the Eastern Azure Dragon. Even if there were no more dragons in the world, even if the Azure Dragon's divinity had disappeared without a trace, the path of ascension had been cut off, and there was no path forward. Since there was no path to take, then she would open up a path herself. Wasn't there an abundant amount of divinity in front of her that she could use? Even if its essence was damaged, and it was no longer as glorious as it was in the past, the Sun Witch's stigmata had as much divinity as she wanted. Where did she get the confidence? In Rome, the blonde youth in the hall frowned. He didn't know whether he should laugh at the arrogance of his rival or admire her absurd courage. This kind of thing, other than the blackbird, who would dare to say they have the confidence? The old priest said expressionlessly, "It's nothing more than a gamble. What you lack is this." The young man was stunned for a moment and frowned. She wants to prove that she is not inferior to the blackbird of the past. The old priest lowered his eyes. She wants to be the strongest in Dongsha after 30 years. At this moment, whether it was Rome, the Russian Federation, India, or anywhere else, countless people turned on their televisions and watched this absurd advancement that was shown to the world. They witnessed the success or death of the number one person in Dongsha's new generation. As the white wolf hook slashed down, the glass sun will shattered inch by inch. Just as the Sun Witch's stigmata wailed, endless light gushed out from it and engulfed Yi Shuya's figure. The moon fox of heart roared silently and took the initiative to jump into the blazing light. It was as if she was running towards death, embracing her new life. Don't be afraid. In the midst of the burning, Yi Shuya stretched out his hand and gripped the last remnant of the sun, the broken blade. "When you finish counting the cracks in the sky, we will be good friends forever, Light." Light swallowed everything. P.S. The title of the chapter is also a Soviet dance song that I like very much. I recommend it. P.S. 2. It seems that many friends didn't see it in the author's book, so I might as well write it here. I'm not in a good state these 2 days, plus I'm out of town. In 2 days, I'll be back to normal. Please don't worry. Today's Moon Breeze is also working hard on sponsored partnerships. Chapter 291. At this moment, between the endless sea and Yamatai City, a few people were nervously looking down at the changes in the light on the huge shadow of Xian Bird. Quafu was impatient. He drank a whole can of beer in one breath, scratched his head, and looked at Xian Bird. "Will it work?" "How would I know?" Xian Bird answered, without raising his head. He frowned, as if he had seen some ominous signs. Quafu was dumbfounded. "Didn't you arrange this?" The old man looked back at him. It should be said that she volunteered. Quafu didn't know what to say. There must be some signs, right? You can't see anything? No, I can see it clearly with my eyes of the stars. There's absolutely no chance of survival. Xian Bird raised his hand, touched the few white whiskers on his chin, and sighed helplessly. This is her destiny. She can't avoid it, she can't escape. Maybe she can choose to take the initiative to face it. At least she can take the initiative in her own hands. Then, it depends on her determination. If she can get through it, she will have a bright future. If she can't, she will turn into ashes. I can only give her a chance. Whether she can change her destiny or not, it depends on her. Is there no way? Kwafu asked. There is. Xian Bird raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the venue. Did you see the kid who just left? Yes, it's Huaisher. That kid's luck is frightening. He is born to be a dragon among men. In the future, if he is not famous in history, he will be notorious for 10,000 years. If Shui, you really want someone to help her, as long as he is there, the possibility of success will increase by 10%. But the price is that she will be entangled with him in the future. The better way is to find Bai Zhe. With Bai Zhe, she can turn misfortune into fortune. As long as she doesn't go too far away from Bai Zhe, the death will never come. But you see, she didn't say anything in the end. Xian Bird said that this decision was not wrong. After all, it was better to rely on oneself than to rely on others. Luck was a thing. After all, there was a limit. Bai Zhe knew that her talent could easily make the younger generation useless, so she ran away all day. Of course, part of the reason was that she was lazy. Every day, she was thinking about how to travel with public funds. As for Huaisher, if he's too close, he might be entangled by that kid's messy red thread. Thinking of this, he suddenly turned around and seriously instructed, Xiaobai, you have to stay away from scumbags in the future. Understand? Ah. The White Emperor's son looked up in confusion. Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. Xian Niao rubbed his brows tiredly. Anyway, with the destiny of the phoenix, it won't be a big deal. Was he worrying too much? This was a problem that he had been trying to avoid after becoming a mystic bird. He had the eye of the star and the ability to see through fate. Coupled with his cautious and stable style, it could be said that he had always been successful in everything he did. But at the same time, wasn't he being too cautious and rigid? After all, the elders couldn't walk all the paths for the children. Who was willing to listen to others' advice and be a puppet? Even if this path was a dead end in the eyes of Xian Niao, if she wanted to take a risk, could he tie her up every day? If she wanted to go, let her go. At least with him, she wouldn't be doomed eternally. At most, he would arrange for her to change her cultivation. There were 14 paths of ascension in the Dongxia genealogy, plus the 4 hidden paths. There was plenty of space for her to show her skills. But if it was possible, who would want their children to meet with failure? The rebellious period is too troublesome. Xian Niao sighed, helplessly. He looked at the girl who should be about to reach the rebellious period and became more and more worried. Someone is coming. In the silence, the White Emperor's son suddenly raised his head and looked into the distance. In the sky, at the end of the endless sea, in the dark thunder and lightning, a humid monsoon blew. A rainstorm was coming. 20 minutes ago, Ingzhou Ryukyu, under the brilliant afternoon sun, the sea rolled up to the golden beach. Outside the bar, the laughter of girls faintly came from the beach in the distance. People came and went, and it was lively. However, the shabby-looking bar was completely silent. It was so quiet that even the dust dancing in the afternoon sun seemed to have a sound. It's really a good sun, isn't it, customer? In the creaking sound of the wooden floor, the burly boss wearing a beach hat came back with a fishing rod. He threw the fish basket aside and looked up at the shadow in the corner. In the shadow, the minister of the left stood respectfully and waited with his head down. What would you like to drink? The boss glanced at him and rolled up the colorful sleeves of his shirt, revealing his hairy arms. He hung the hat on the hanger and walked to the bar. The minister of the left thought for a moment and said, "Plain water is fine. We don't sell that kind of thing here." The boss sneered and opened the whiskey bottle with his teeth. He broke a whole piece of ice from the fridge and threw it into a head-sized glass. Then he filled the glass to the brim. Bang! He slammed the glass in front of the minister of the left. "Please, America's special whiskey for men, especially for sissies in Ingzhou." The minister of the left's face twitched. He looked down at the whiskey, which was obviously over the alcohol content, and didn't know if he should drink it. After hesitating for a long time, he sighed and said, "I'm here with His Majesty's decree." "That's none of my business." After the boss poured a cup for himself, he raised his head and gulped down half of it. Then he sat in front of the piano, casually lifted the cover of the piano, and casually played the keys on it. It was as if he was entertaining himself. The minister of the left's face was bitter. He picked up the glass and drank the whole bottle. Then he felt in his pocket, found an unfinished cigar, and lit it again. The smoke curled up and blurred his face. "You can say whatever you want to say. It seems that I came at the wrong time." The minister of the left sighed. "I didn't say that people from Ingzhou couldn't enter, but you guys always come too early or too late. The former is unpleasant, and the latter is even more unpleasant. I think it's better if you guys don't come, but this is your country." The boss shrugged. "I'm just a passerby." The minister of the left stood up and held the emperor's decree in his hand. He bowed deeply and said, "Please help us, General." The old man who was called General sneered. "You should have said so earlier. Hey, Ingzhou people like to be so awkward." The minister of the left still maintained his begging posture. "Now we can only rely on you to save the situation." "Ah, that's true," but the man thought for a while and shook his head. "No." The minister of the left was stunned. "Let me guess. You must think that I'm a war maniac, right?" The general smoked and said mockingly, "Once there's a chance, I'll start a war everywhere like a mad dog. Anyone, anywhere, I'll see you, and I'll fight you to the death." Before the minister of the left answered, he nodded and admitted it. "Yes, that's right. But now is not the time, kid." He laughed strangely. "Before it's time for war, you have to learn to be patient, wait, and compromise. This is the common problem of you Ingzhou people. You're always fighting with other people because of bottles and cans. Why don't you cherish your own life?" Following his hoarse words, an iron-like majesty appeared in his azure-blue eyes, a terrifying power that was at the peak of the fifth level rose from this old man's body. It shrouded everything and oppressed everything violently. That voice paused after every word, like a hammer hammering the soul of the left minister. It wanted to turn his words into nails and wedge them into his brain. Since life is precious, it should be given an equal value. But here, it's too cheap. If you don't cherish your own life, then others won't cherish you. If you don't cherish other people's lives, then others will treat you like ants. Isn't this the most obvious principle in the world? The minister of the left minister's face was pale. In front of this man, he no longer had his elegant demeanor. He could only muster up his courage. "At least, please take back Yamatai City. His Majesty can, based on what?" The general retorted, "Just for a few philosopher's stones. Or for that shard of a broken mirror. That's too cheap. Kid, did you really take my words to heart?" That voice was low and deep, like thunder exploding in the minister's ears. It cruelly tore his eardrums apart, causing him to fall to the ground in a sorry state. Viscous blood flowed out from his ears. He wanted to open his mouth and beg, but under the general's gaze, he could not make a sound, until a young voice came from outside the door. God's wedge. The emperor's voice came from outside the door. A short figure pushed open the door and walked in. The sunlight behind him hid his face in the shadows. Other than the Sun Shaman's stigmata shard, there's a God's wedge under Yamatai City. It's a legacy left behind by the previous law overlord. Is this not enough to repay the general? When his words rang out, even the general fell silent. It was not just the emperor's sudden arrival, but also the words that came from his mouth. God's wedge, the last miracle left behind by the gods in this world. It was also proof of their existence. No, it should be said that it was the only authority left behind by the gods before they died. A miracle of miracles, a power of power. It was a great object that surpassed the miraculous stigmata. If one wanted to break through the limit of the 5th level and step into the realm of the gods, it was something that was indispensable. Ingzhou still has such a heritage. After a long silence, the general suddenly laughed softly. As a reward, it's enough. But the problem is, why should I listen to the orders of a brat and let him ride on my neck? He slowly got up and lowered his head, staring at the short emperor in front of him with a mocking expression. You can't be thinking that you can order me around just by giving me some benefits, right? But the emperor raised his head and looked at him, staring at the face that was too terrifying for him. He suppressed the fear in his heart, even if his legs were already trembling. Could it be, he asked, could it be that the general is not my subject? In the silence, the general froze in place, staring at the face that was gently twitching because of fear. After a long time, his shoulders suddenly shook. He laughed loudly. It was not only with anger or killing intent, but also with surprise or mockery. The hoarse voice turned into thunder, spreading above the vault of the sky, lifting the dark clouds, and instantly covering the scorching sun and sunlight. The world instantly turned dark. Lightning burst out, like burning metal, stinging everyone's eyes. In the end, only the loud sound of thunder echoed between the sky and the earth. Finally, you look like an emperor. Brat, he grinned, looked at the child in front of him, and nodded with satisfaction. Very good. Since I'm here and become your subject, how can I not respect your orders? But can you bear the price of ordering me? The emperor trembled and did not speak. He stubbornly held his head high. Very good, very good. The general raised his wine cup and drank the remaining liquor in one gulp. Then, I'll be back soon. The wine cup was placed on the bar counter, and in the wine cup, the ice cubes moved with the ripples of the water. Suddenly, there was a crisp sound, and it shattered, crumbling into powder like sand. Only the ferocious eagle's statue broke out of the ice, and in the dim light, it spread its wings and flew high. It was so ferocious, and the figure in front of the emperor had already disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a terrifying storm on the endless sea. Under the shadow that spread its wings and soared high in the sky, countless terrifying bolts of lightning and thunderclaps shot out, easily raising a tsunami that was tens of thousands of meters tall and brutally devouring all the borders and hells along the way. It went straight down, and in an instant it came to the sky above Yamatai City. Then an endless torrential rain rose from the sea and was gathered by the fierce wind, forming a terrifying tornado that was enough to swallow Yamatai City. Frenzied lightning shot out in all directions, because the figure that suddenly appeared along with the maniacal laughter punched forward. Thus it was earth-shattering. Chapter 292. The phantom of the bald eagle suddenly appeared on the endless sea. It soared between the sea and the sky, and as the figure waved its fist, it flapped its wings, pushing the thunderclouds and torrential rain thousands of miles away. Endless lightning turned into a torrent, forming a blazing waterfall that lit up the dark sky. gushing towards Yamatai City. As the sky and earth trembled, the mystic bird lowered its finger and slightly turned a circle. Then, faint starlight appeared in the void between Yamatai City and the endless sea. First, there was a large and empty frame. Purple Star Enclosure, Supreme Star Enclosure, and Sky City Enclosure. The three enclosures were complete. Then, the Azure Dragon, Black Tortoise, Vermilion Bird, and White Tiger Divinity appeared, laying the foundations of the four continents. Finally, the Horn, Kong, Di, Fong, Xian, Wei, Jido, Nyo, Nu, Su, Wei, Sure, by the radiance of the 28 constellations lit up like flames. It covered the entire endless sea. Wherever the Milky Way passed, the wind and waves were calm, and there were no clouds for thousands of miles. Even the earth-shattering waves suddenly calmed down, and the sea became as smooth as a mirror, reflecting the stars. It was impossible to distinguish up from down, left from right, east from west. The dancing lightning quietly dissipated under the illumination of the starlight. The mystic bird finally raised its eyes and slowly shook its head at the expert that it did not know if it could be called an uninvited guest. This path is blocked. No, surrounded by endless thunderclouds. The general's lips curled into a tyrannical smile. If I say it's blocked, it's blocked. The giant phantom of the bald eagle suddenly stretched its neck and screeched. The wings wrapped in thunderclouds shook and forcibly broke through the boundary of the starry sky, entering the domain of the 28 constellations. The terrifying gravitational force emitted by the stars in the void was like a gentle breeze to him. Following the general's roar, a terrifying wave of origin substance erupted, and the stars in the sky were swept up by the power of the wings, and the suppression of the heavenly will was actually tilted. Carrying the weight of thousands of kilograms, the general stepped on the frozen sea surface, leaving behind cracks that could not be closed, and moved forward. When he raised his head, he grinned, revealing a happy smile. I never thought that one day I would be able to fight with the king of the East Xia lineage again. He laughed, waving his fist without any explanation. Come, let me see how big is the difference between you and the previous generation Luwu. On the endless sea, terrifying waves once again. Thunder spread out from the water vapor and covered the general's body, as if it was a pure golden armor, majestic and cold, and emitting a sinister aura. Facing the mystic bird in front of Yamatai, he stood still and waved his fist. Terrifying power once again. General, it's the general. Arthur, Lord Arthur, sir. Your Excellency. At that moment, in front of the live broadcast screen, countless people shouted in excitement and shock. Looking at the robust man with graying hair, he couldn't hide his awe. To the people of Yingzhou, he was one of the true rulers of Yingzhou. Just one person was enough to massacre the entire Tianjin faction's sublimator. He was a terrifying leader who made the islands submit in fear and offer him the title of general. To most people, he was the strongest knight in America 90 years ago. He was the eternal victory knight under the White Crown King. He was the only person in the history of America to be awarded 5-star crowns. Even after he failed to vie for the position of the master of the American lineage, he still massacred the entire Congress and retreated unscathed. He was a tyrant who forced the Federation to exile him outside of the Americas. Douglas Arthur. Even though 90 years had passed, no one dared to underestimate the former strongest man in America. In the past, he only needed to raise his arm and call for an unknown number of American ascendants to betray their beloved country and join him again. When he was at his peak, he was only one step away from being a natural enemy. If it wasn't for his arrogance and tyranny that could almost match his own talent, he would have already taken over the White City and become the King of America. The so-called heavens' chosen one was such a person. He stood behind the white-crowned king and faced many enemies with the face of the eternal victory knight. He had never been defeated. Then, after 90 years, how much of the ferocity of the former strongest man in America still existed? Just as he was about to throw a punch at Yamatai, the figure of a giant suddenly appeared in front of him, facing the general's punch. The giant raised his arm that seemed to be made of bronze. The shadow of the giant king, Kwafu, appeared behind him. A mournful chasm appeared on the frozen endless sea. Following his stomp, he threw out an iron fist and met it head-on. The two fists that were entrusted with infinite power collided. The airwaves violently spread in all directions. Arthur's smile was still happy and ferocious. He didn't move, but Kwafu couldn't help but take a step back. A crack appeared on the bronze arm. "Old man, you have taken good care of yourself. Do you have any secret formula?" Kwafu raised his eyebrows in surprise. The bronze arm shook violently, and the violent power doubled again. It shook the frozen sea under his feet and forced Arthur's fist back. "Old soldiers don't die, kid." The general laughed in the lightning. His muscles bulged. He raised his left arm again and threw a punch at Kwafu's face. "Nor will they gradually wither," he said, "and you are still far from it." A roar burst out. The thunder dragon roared past. Kwafu's feet drew two cracks on the sea. He had already retreated dozens of meters away. The palm on his face was scorched black and electric. He couldn't help but twitch. Damn, what did this old man need to grow up? He was almost 200 years old. How could he still be so strong? "Do you see? Kid, is this the difference in strength?" Arthur proudly opened his arms. The shadow of the bald eagle behind him became more and more ferocious. The eagle's shrill cry spread in all directions, showing its existence. Eagle god, the fifth-order American genealogy. It was the supreme animal god in Indian legends, the existence that ruled tens of thousands of spirits on the Golden Mountain. This sacred totem almost became the representative of America after a long time. It could be said that it represented the American genealogy, except for the power recognized by the source code and all the ascendants. It was no different from the symbol of the American genealogy. It was not an exaggeration to call it the uncrowned king. Do you see? In front of Kwafu, Arthur raised his fist again, which was wrapped in lightning. He grinned and laughed. "This is the miracle brought by freedom." What the hell? Kwafu was dumbfounded. Freedom! 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 Under the starry sky of the mystic bird, Arthur moved forward as if there was no one around. He casually tore off his tattered shirt, revealing his muscles covered with scars. As if standing on the podium, he shouted fanatically, opened his arms, and roared with the bald eagle. "This is the hope of America, the foundation of America, the virtue of America. Listen to me, kid." The general pointed at Kwafu, who was dumbfounded. "The hymn of America is the hymn of freedom. The spirit of America is the spirit of freedom. It doesn't matter whether it's a school shooting, drug abuse, corruption, or even the Baghdad War and international sanctions. Those are all unimportant things. None of them are worth mentioning," he declared solemnly, "because as long as this freedom exists, America is invincible. Damn it, how can you talk about committing crimes so high and mighty?" Kwafu couldn't listen to it anymore. He raised his hand and interrupted. "And you're a F** Kinging Zhou now, aren't you? Uncle, you've said so much, but you still lost." Arthur's expression froze. Immediately it became gloomy, as if he had been poked in a sore spot. "I found another shortcoming of you, besides not being free." The general's smile gradually turned cold. "Learn to respect your seniors, kid." In that instant, the berserk eagle god rushed over, bringing with it 50 stars that lit up beneath its wings. His smile was ferocious. His arm had suddenly expanded several times. Countless muscles bulged as if they were wrapped in blazing thunder. He punched out and tore apart the starry sky that bound him. 10 times the spiritual liberation of America. Detroit. The stars were moving. The stars revolved violently, transforming, transmitting, and discharging this enormous power layer by layer. The entire sea surface suddenly collapsed by several dozen meters, and in the distance, several tens of thousands of feet tall raging waves were set off. The aftershocks endlessly spread out in all directions. Quafu had disappeared from where he was and reappeared on the shadow of the mystic bird. Are you used to courting death? Whenever you meet someone you can't beat, you go up and provoke them. The mystic bird glanced at him in confusion. How many years have you been at the 5th level? They have been at the 5th level for many years. I was going to take advantage of them. Quafu shook his arm bitterly. I didn't expect this old coffin to be so difficult to deal with. It's true that an old man who doesn't die is a thief. Why do you think this old man? He still wanted to say something, but he shut his mouth under the expressionless gaze of the mystic bird. He almost forgot that if they were talking about old men, there was another one in front of him. It seems that you haven't exercised enough. The old man glanced at him faintly. After you go back, you will replace Di Ting to be on duty in Shanghai. After passing on the information to the hothead, he looked down at Arthur, who had walked to the sea not far away. The genealogy of Ingzhou can't afford to lose, can it? What's the matter? Are you going to do it yourself, Mystic Bird? I'm looking forward to it. Arthur asked happily. When we first met, you were still a teenager. That's right. At that time, Sir General's reputation was already at its peak. The Mystic Bird nodded faintly, but did not join the battle. Unfortunately, even in the genealogy of Dongsha, I'm not good at fighting with people. I'm afraid I don't have the honor to fight with you. That fool just now is another case. You won't argue with a hothead, right? I don't care about those things. I just want to fight with someone. Arthur took out the unextinguished cigar from his pocket, tilted his head, and took a few puffs. He asked, "Who is the one I'm fighting today?" Bai Zhe, the legendary strongest in Dongsha, the weirdest Di Ting, or the current top talisman of Dongsha. I like that guy very much. If there's a chance, it'll be better to fight with him. No, it should be me. A slightly immature voice suddenly sounded out, causing Arthur's pupils to shrink instantly. Behind him? No, when was it? Chapter 293. Thank you, Alliance Leader of 20180906 1250 Your name is too long to fit in the title. Sorry, I've been waiting here for a while. Bai Dizzy poked his head out from the side and looked at him curiously, blinking. You don't seem to have noticed me? When Arthur turned around, he only saw the girl standing quietly behind him. Her eyes were big and round, and she was wearing tight track pants and a tank top. Her hair was tied up, and a pigeon was cooing on her shoulder. In front of the general's sinister smile, she was like a little white flower. You're Chuhai's daughter? Arthur frowned and looked at her carefully. What a pity. Bai Dizzy tilted his head and thought for a moment, then said seriously, I think it's pretty good. There's nothing to pity. With such talent, you're really a child that the abyss loves. Even Arthur couldn't help but feel pity. It doesn't matter if you can't become a natural enemy for the rest of your life. That's so far away. It doesn't matter if it's a pity. The girl named Zhu Qingyu shrugged. If you want to talk about trouble, it's not as troublesome as high school math. Do you hate math? Zhu Qingyu nodded. And English. You can hate math. General Arthur raised his finger and said seriously, "But you can't hate English." But the words are really hard to memorize. There are so many tenses. It's really troublesome. Listen carefully, little girl, Arthur said seriously. English it's freedom, right? That's right. Arthur put his hands on his hips and laughed proudly. It seems like you've already understood this point. Child, how about it? Are you interested in coming to Ingzhou? We have guaranteed admission to an Ivy League educational institution. Where we come from, you can be a good girl who smokes, drinks, and gets tattoos. No, that can't be considered a good girl, right? The girl felt awkward and felt like she couldn't continue the conversation. She asked seriously, "Can I make the first move?" "You're going to make the first move?" I wanted to talk about freedom for a while longer. Arthur took off the cigar and flicked the ash regretfully. The tyrannical and ferocious look from before was gone. In front of this little girl, he was like a kind elder. He pointed to his chest and said, "Come, child, I'll let you experience the invincible American spirit. Then, I'll try." The beautiful silhouette formed by the 5 virtues flashed behind the White Emperor's son. She raised her hand and jabbed it forward. Arthur's expression abruptly changed. His originally confident appearance disappeared. He abruptly raised his hand, and a sharp sound rang out from his palm. The cigar at the corner of his mouth was silently shaved off. As the flames gradually extinguished, cold sweat began to appear on the back of his neck. In that fleeting glimpse, he caught a glimpse of the rune that appeared like a bubble in the girl's palm. Absolute. This was a divine imprint through and through. In fact, it was powerful enough to injure him, but he was unable to detect any traces of it from Zhu Qingyu's body. This was a power that would be too terrifying for any ascender, but in her hands, it was extremely tamed, almost completely fusing into her body. It was as if she was using her own body. Just how terrifyingly talented did she have to be able to control this power to such a degree at the age of 14 or 15? Is this only the second most talented person in the Eastern Summer Country? Arthur's expression became serious. He no longer referred to the girl as Chu Hai's daughter. The title White Emperor's son is surprisingly appropriate. The girl laughed awkwardly. "It's only because of the phoenix's stigmata that I can barely control it. If you really want to talk about it, I'm not the one who's strong." "That's fine. Now that you can control this power, you can definitely be called a strong person." Arthur nodded approvingly and clenched his fists. "Get ready, White Emperor's son. I'm going to attack. Hey, the differential treatment is too much." Quafu, who was off in the distance, had already given up and was munching on a watermelon. "Why are you so violent when it's me, but so gentle when it's little White? It's like you're some kind of senior." So this guy had no idea how annoying he was at all. The mystic bird sighed. In that instant, 10 times American spirit liberation, San Francisco. The bald eagle's cry resounded in all directions. Pure power gathered on the general's fist. The strong person who had once been invincible in the realm of discovery threw another punch at White Emperor's son. A mighty torrent was released. In an instant, it suppressed the phantom of the phoenix. It was suppressed. In the boom, Arthur's own power collided with the unknown miraculous mark. It instantly split into 2 streams and spilled to the side. The terrifying aura was the sharpest in the world. Even the eagle god's power was cut open, but White Emperor's son took a step back. A thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. The white dove on his shoulder cooed and flapped its wings, as if it was saying something loudly. "Ha! It's just a warm-up. Can't take it any more?" Arthur stepped forward. His ferocious aura appeared again. He threw a punch. 10 times American spirit liberation. New York. It was like a comet hitting Earth. Just a casual wave of his hand could cause such a terrifying power to spill out. Boom! The boundless ocean descended another few dozen meters. White Emperor's son's figure suddenly appeared off in the distance, dodging the terrifying attack. Immediately afterwards, however, another figure appeared behind Arthur. The incredibly sharp and dangerous miraculous mark appeared once again, slashing downwards with a loud boom. When the violent shockwaves swept past, the entire area fell deathly silent. Arthur was stunned. There were two White Emperor's sons. He suspected that this was an illusion, but no matter how he tried to sense it, there was no mistaking it. These were two identical Tier 5 phoenixes. However, one of the sleeves of the new Zhu Qingyu had already been torn. Sorry, I seem to have gotten lost again. The new girl smiled awkwardly at him. Before he could react, the miraculous mark slashed downwards. Arthur's expression suddenly changed. He felt like there was a dagger at his back. 100 times American Spirit Liberation. Texas! The white-headed eagle soared into the sky, its wings flapping wildly. Lightning bolts shot out in all directions, forcefully resisting the opponent's doubled strength. At this moment, Arthur's body had grown by a few dozen centimeters, turning into a burly man with bulging muscles. A violent storm began to gather in his hands, turning into a terrifying storm that was enough to swallow an entire city. Without any hesitation, he forcefully pushed White Emperor's son aside and charged at the stunned girl in front of him. A pale green light began to appear on his tightly clenched fists. The terrifying radiance of metal fission began to radiate in all directions. A scorching light as hot as the sun suddenly burst forth. 1,000 times American Spirit Liberation. Little boy. An instant later, the terrifying temperature of a nuclear fission burst forth from his hands, howling towards the girl who had no way of dodging. However, Zhu Qingyu's figure suddenly flickered, disappearing without a trace. In his astonishment, Arthur only had time to see that at the last moment, the sleeve on her arm had been burnt to ashes. In that instant, he finally realized what had happened. Then, he was filled with disbelief. Is this what you mean by getting lost? He turned around and stared at the girl who had regrouped and was charging towards him once again. His eyes were filled with shock and fear. Time warp? Absolute. The nameless, miraculous mark appeared for a brief moment. 3 different figures appeared in the surroundings, slashing down towards America's former, most powerful being. It wasn't just the frozen, boundless ocean that was affected. Even the starry sky that the mystic bird had created was shattered by White Emperor's son's attack. Everything was frozen in place by this sharp aura. 3 sharp auras from different timelines intertwined with everything, as if they were pillars that propped up the heavens and the earth. They stirred up hell, causing everything to collapse into the most basic particles, turning into chaotic elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. Then, pure death and new life would be ushered in. However, in the depths of the chaos, the image of a white-headed eagle flapped its wings and soared into the sky. It broke through that incredibly sharp aura, wrapped in the power of a new era, and cried out loudly, 100 times American Spirit Liberation, Washington! Following the general's laughter, a terrifying light rose from the chaos, breaking through White Emperor's son's obstruction. It instantly set off a violent wave, clashing with the miraculous mark in White Emperor's son's hand, closing an inch by inch. This was freedom, absolute freedom, a violent power that nothing in the world could restrain. After noticing the strange ability that White Emperor's son was hiding, Arthur instantly gave up on the idea of tangling with her and took the attack head-on. A trace of blood dripped from his hand, and the crack was so deep that his bones could be seen. The white-headed eagle cried out angrily. Amidst his hoarse laughter, he soared into the sky, bringing with him a blazing light that erupted from the depths of the sea, charging straight towards the mystic bird's shadow, tearing it apart and breaking through the shroud of Shinue's frame. He stretched out his hand, pressing towards hell that was already filled with countless cracks. Yamatai, even without using the miraculous mark, and without using any other power other than his own physical strength, the former most powerful being of America still broke through the obstruction of the Dongsha system and arrived before Yamatai. He was still the one who won. And in that instant, from within Yamatai came a distant and ancient voice, like the turbulence of the sea. Not only Arthur, even the mystic bird, was stunned. That was a dragon's cry? No, it was just similar. There were already no dragons in the world. Even if Yi Shuya broke through, it was impossible for him to become the azure dragon of the East. But what was it that appeared now? In the shroud of the shifting stars, in the sky above Yamatai, the enormous moon fox of heart appeared its own burning silhouette, welcoming its transformation from the miraculous flame. But immediately afterwards, it suddenly became sluggish. It paused for a moment, as if it had used up all its strength. It was about to face failure. The endless shadow changed indeterminately, until finally it gradually sank into nothingness. In the flame of divinity, Yi Shuya, who was about to be burned to ashes, helplessly revealed a trace of a bitter smile. No, it was still lacking a bit. It was still lacking a bit. It was clear that she had accumulated enough. Even if her determination was already as firm as iron, even if her plan was flawless, but she had gambled all on it. In the end, she had fallen before the final test. She had already completely grasped the power of divinity, but she had no way of dissecting this miraculous brewing process. It was just like the divine weapon in the furnace had clearly reached maturity, but it was unable to take shape. This destiny was not willing to yield to Yi Shuya's arrangements. It forcefully transformed itself into the destined failure of the Azure Dragon. No matter what, Yi Shuya could not avoid the existence of the dragon. No, it should be said that the shadow left behind by the dragon was too enormous. It was so enormous that she had lost her direction. Other than the Azure Dragon of the East, who controlled one of the 4 heavenly wills, what kind of form could she use to contain such an enormous amount of divinity? But in her daze, she heard a helpless sigh. The youngsters these days, 1 or 2, are all inflexible. Could it be that the one who controls the destiny must be a dragon? That voice sighed, as if it could no longer continue to watch the show from the side. It was as if it hated iron for not becoming steel and pushed it from the back. Let me come, give you a hand. In that instant, the flame of divinity exploded with a bang. Yi Shuya felt that her soul had suddenly shattered in this sudden change. But immediately afterwards, her consciousness spread out in all directions along with the miracle. The shadow of the moon fox of the heart suddenly shattered, falling apart. Countless stars rose from within. In the end, it evolved into the genuine crepe myrtle. The destiny that had originally transformed into the Azure Dragon of the East rapidly changed. In the end, it actually directly inherited the blackbird, evolving into the ruler of the central great sky. Like a dragon, but not a dragon, but a step further. And in the end, what emerged from the flame of the miracle was actually a square silhouette. That was a stone tablet. That's right. Everyone could clearly see that it was a stone tablet with an ancient aura. Full of vicissitudes and trials, the surface was empty. Not a single word was written. It manifested the aura of the king. The radiance of the sun and the bright moon alternately flashed from within. The shadow of all living things was enveloped within. A silver feather pen appeared from the void. Stained with the last traces of the moon fox of the heart, it swept across the stone tablet. The pen moved like a dragon and snake, leaving behind 8 large words with thick ink and heavy colors. Sun and moon shine together. 2 saints arrive. In the corner, there was an insignificant cheer that no one could see flashing past. Sister is awesome. In the instant these 8 words entered the wordless stone tablet, the entire Yamatai city shook violently. That miracle that was like thunder and rain splashed in all directions welcomed a change. A mighty movement played from the broken palace city, causing the broken palace city to instantly recover to a new state, even surpassing the original splendor of gold and jade. The shadow of the sun and moon alternated in the sky, causing the entire city to radiate with vitality, welcoming a new life from deathly stillness. Because a ruler had descended here. He was not an azure dragon, but he carried the mandate of heaven to rule the central great sky. He was not a ruler, but he already had the potential and foundation to rule the eastern summer. The instant Yi Shuya completed his advancement, the shadow that had been binding the 7 mansions of the east for a long time was completely removed, and Yamatai City finally welcomed its own emperor. Chapter 294. At this moment, under the witness of countless gazes, the burning divine flame gradually extinguished. From the image of the wordless steel, an enormous silhouette slowly rose, revealing a pure white color. In the instant it was born, under the support of Yamatai City, it enveloped the entire city. That was a white fox. It was not the charm of the Green Hill fox, nor was it the strangeness of the moon fox of heart. Rather, it was a holy and cold majesty. Without a doubt, she controlled the power of the Eastern Azure Dragon. After throwing away the dragon's divinity, she was bestowed with the mandate of heaven from the Purple Myrtle Empire. Completely breaking away from the shadow of the past, she opened up a new path from the path of destruction. Through self-improvement, her own will advanced. The moon fox of heart that transformed from divinity broke through the image of a demon in the past, reaching the boundary of divinity and entering the central great sky. Great sky white fox. The instant that figure that had almost condensed into substance appeared, it meant that Yi Shuya's advancement no longer had any obstructions. The huge gamble that he had made with all his might welcomed a stupefying and generous return. Not only did she reach the 4th step, but another path was opened up, stepping onto the grand path that was close to the heavens. In her hands, one of the 4 branches of Eastern Summer's path of heavens was reconnected. According to the rough calculations of scholars, just this one move made her obtain as much as 0.3% of the correction value. Because of this, the chain reaction was simply uncountable. The originally unbalanced 4 directions, star field that lost the dragon welcomed a new miracle into the world. A new variable was introduced into the path of heaven's will. All of the prophecy-type innate skills in Eastern Summer received a 20% increase from the original foundation. And in Eastern Summer's legends, the white fox itself was an auspicious sign among auspicious signs. Right now, the appearance of this miracle, regardless of cause or effect, would add fuel to Eastern Summer's almost flourishing fortune. Of course, whether it was adding flowers to brocade or taking a step further, that would depend on Yi Shuya's own ability in the future. What people paid attention to the most was the purple myrtle chi reflected on the great sky white fox's body. If she wanted to enter great sky without the permission of the blackbird, it was impossible. Apart from her own destiny as a ruler, she was also bestowed with the ability to interfere with the will of heaven. In other words, right now, she had already grasped the essence of the path of heaven's will. Rounding it off, it was a low-level version of the mystic bird. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that this was the chosen successor of the blackbird. Next, even if Yi Shuya did not say anything, Dongxia would crazily pour resources into her. Her future could be said to be limitless as long as one grasped the path of destiny. They would have the qualifications to fight for the position of the next Eastern Summer lineage king. Regardless of whether she succeeded or not, no matter who took the throne, her power would not be small, not to mention the political assets left by the Blackbird. From this moment onwards, in front of the screen, it was unknown how many of Yi Shuiya's formidable opponents were helplessly smiling bitterly, their expressions bitter. After so many years of fighting and competition, she was actually the first to take a step forward. She bid farewell to the new generation of Fish Pond and officially stepped into the territory of the rulers' unwillingness, anger, admiration, jealousy, and even helplessness. Their former opponent had turned into a towering mountain that rose from the horizon. No matter what, the new generation that the various factions and organizations had placed high hopes on had to react. From the moment of Yi Shuiya's advancement, it was destined that there would be a huge wave that would unfold in the present realm, the border, and hell. And Yi Shuiya's magnificent feat at this moment was the perfect conclusion to the new talent competition. Under everyone's witness, the former number one person of Dongshia's new generation opened his path in a bold gamble. What could be more appropriate than this? Such a dazzling change. Even the general's fist could not help but pause for a moment. He was amazed by the brilliant performance of the younger generation in hell. And this was the final gentleness of the old senior. Why is it that there are so many good talents in Jades, but they are all in other people's homes? He sighed with regret. In his hand, the fist that had paused for a moment after allowing Yi Shuiya to pass through the most dangerous moment once again smashed down. This time, it was even more dangerous and ruthless than before. 100,000 times America's spirit has changed. Ira's declaration. With this fist, he wanted to smash Yamatai City, completely severing the resonance between this hell and Yi Shuiya. He wanted to completely destroy her originally smooth path to the fifth step. Senior, don't be angry. The child is still young. The smiling old man blocked in front of him. If there's anything, come at me. The Blackbird, who claimed to be the least skilled in fighting in Dongxia, raised the white wolf hook in his hand. Following the iron fist's might that changed the era. It slashed down. In an instant, the stars moved. Within 100 li, the entire endless sea once again collapsed. Countless amounts of water vapors rose, turning into a torrential rain, sprinkling down towards the dark hell. In the deepest part of hell, a series of continuous explosions erupted. It was unknown just how many places were affected by the power of this fist under the shift of the stars, suffering a calamity. With just one fist, the entire Yamatai city had fallen to a depth towards the deeper parts of hell. At this moment, it was Yi Shuiya's weakest moment. Following the resonance between her and Yamatai city's aura, an endless amount of origin substance crazily circulated between the two, completely fusing into one. She possessed the supreme imperial power in this place. Following her passing through the most difficult hurdle, the great white fox that had completed its transformation welcomed a long period of deep sleep, slowly covering the entire Yamatai city with its own sacred mark, until the day it was completed. With regards to the attacks from the outside world, it had no ability to resist at all. Rise for me! Kwa Fu's roar sounded from the deepest part of the ocean. At this moment, he had already appeared in the scene. Separated by the surging ocean, he suddenly threw out the heavy fishing rod in his hand towards the abyss. The fishing rod that was forged with the copper of Mount Shoshan, which was worth 10,000 gold per gram, reached an exaggerated length of 16 kilometers. Following Kwa Fu's wave, several golden rune stones lit up from the top. Divine marks were engraved on it, whipping the air, forming a straight scar in the sky. With a mournful cry, a faintly discernible thin line was thrown into the abyss along with the golden hook. The psychic golden hook nimbly wrapped around Yamatai City. Following that, the thin line was stretched taut. Under Kwafu's feet, the mountain range collapsed. The muscles all over his body swelled, and the strength of his muscles multiplied, and multiplied again. In the end, it soared to a level that would make one's jaw drop. With just a breath, it set off a hurricane, and thunder burst out from thousands of miles away. All the phantoms of the Longbow Way appeared behind him, sharing the burden of Kwafu's unlimited increase in strength. The strength of all the Abyss Giants was gathered. At the last moment, the falling momentum of Yamatai City was forcibly stopped. Following Kwafu's roar, the fishing rod was lifted up, but it was pressed into an arc by the terrifying weight. And the Yamatai City that was moving in the chaos of the abyss was actually slowly approaching the direction of Dongxia. Mystic Bird forcibly withstood the full force of the general's attack. Following that, the divine mark of the White Emperor followed closely behind like a shadow. 3 identical divine mark of the White Emperor showed a completely different appearance, combining with each other, replacing Mystic Bird in front. Mystic Bird retreated without hesitation and took out a bright golden seal from his sleeve and threw it into the Yamatai City behind him. The illusory golden seal was formed by the divine mark of the White Emperor. At this moment, after leaving the restraint of Mystic Bird, it suddenly spread out from the sky of Yamatai City and covered the city below. A line of ancient seal script instantly appeared in the sky, deeply imprinted into every inch of the city's land. By the shore of the land, all are the subjects of the king. In an instant, the entire Yamatai City welcomed an earth-shattering change. When Mystic Bird personally imprinted this seal on the sky of Yamatai City, it was equivalent to registering this place in the origin code of Dongxia's genealogy and announcing the sovereignty of Dongxia's genealogy. The dragon vein that covered the entire Dongxia instantly came through the air, turning into endless golden rain, irrigating every inch of the land. Wherever the rain passed, the style of all the words and buildings welcomed the change. In the end, a line of golden words that were certified by Dongxia's genealogy slowly rose from the sky of the city. 3rd New Bianliang City, Tisk. You bunch of people, after eating and drinking your fill, why are you beating up the chef? Under the pressure of the dragon vein, a helpless sigh sounded from a corner of the city. In that instant, Mystic Bird raised his eyes in understanding. As expected, the world that the Eye of the Stars saw was completely different from the eyes of ordinary people. It could be said that what it saw was a tangled and complicated line of fate. It was precisely because of this that he was able to, after receiving Yi Shuiya's hint, rely on his own experience to keenly sense the void fate hidden behind Yi Shuiya from the inextricably linked chaos. Relying on the chaos of the rookie competition, he had completely covered all his tracks in the darkness, and no one could sense it. It was simply perfect. If he did not help Yi Shuiya, he might not have exposed himself. But did this help come from good intentions? No matter what, he was not willing to let such a huge oversight be hidden under his eyes. Immediately after, he saw a strand of black rising from the ground, like dancing ink forming a black outline in the sky. That was a fleeting illusion. Even if it was only for a moment, everyone could clearly see that in the body of the flying bird, there was a crystal that was as bright as gold and diamond. The divinity that had condensed into a substance was operating within it, reflecting the solemn outline of the sun. As if it was the center of the world, the moment it appeared, everyone fell into a momentary trance, as if the world was revolving around it. That was the supreme authority, the remnant of God, the path to the natural enemy, the source of miracles, and the essence of all power. God's wedge. In front of this magnificent miracle, that could not be looked at directly, everyone's breathing stopped for a moment. Then they saw the illusory bird that came out of nowhere spread its wings, wrapped the god's wedge, and flew thousands of miles away in an instant. After breaking through the double blockade of Xianyao and General, it disappeared into the deepest part of hell. Slip away, slip away. Chapter 295. After a long time, Xianyao recovered from the shock and looked at the general in disbelief. He seemed to have understood something and couldn't help but laugh. It's actually the god's wedge. From the bottom of his heart, he admired the nerve of the Yingzhou genealogy, such a treasure of the genealogy. How could you throw it around? You crazy? What are you after? Once again, he had a better understanding of the internal chaos of the Yingzhou genealogy. At the same time, he could not help but feel a sense of wonder in his astonishment. It was as if two villages were fighting over land, but unexpectedly, someone dug out a gold nugget the size of a head from the ground, carried it, and ran away. This time, in the battle between the Dongxia genealogy and the Yingzhou genealogy, the biggest benefit was taken away by someone else. Even Xianyao, who could see through fate, couldn't have predicted that the god's wedge was something that wasn't part of the plan from the beginning. But so what if he didn't expect it? When people get old, they have to learn to be content. He had already gotten over it. Yamatai was in his hands, Yishuya had advanced, and that was enough for him. What did the Yingzhou genealogy have to do with him? Ha 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 ha. It seems that this god's wedge is not fated with you, and me, General. Ha! I've been completely tricked. Arthur snorted. Nobody knew whether he was furious or sighing at the courage of the schemer. He just glanced at the place where the god's wedge had disappeared and didn't chase after it in exasperation. Anyway, he couldn't catch up. He just didn't know which old ghost was behind all this, but no matter what, there would be clues left behind, and he could slowly settle this account in the future. The shadow of Eagle God spread his wings, and he looked back at the cautious White Emperor behind him. He grinned, revealing a smile that he thought was kind, and was about to say something. Then he saw Xianyao take a step forward and stand in front of the girl. Xianyao raised her phone with a smile and showed him the 911 number. FBI warning. Tisk! Arthur glared fiercely at Mystic Bird, and then disappeared. As Xianyao waved his hand again, the live broadcast camera was silently extinguished. Countless stars like a curtain covered the new Bianliang, and with Quafu's roar, it completely merged into the orbit of Dongxia. The overall situation was settled. The Asian rookie competition thus came to an end. The rest would be up to the organizers. So, have I been forgotten just like that? In the live stream, Di Ting was holding the melon that Bai Zhe handed him with a dumbfounded expression. Beside him, Bai Zhe was happy to slack off. Isn't it pretty good? But have you ever thought of a problem? The Harkin's expression turned bitter as it looked at the list of names that were completely wiped out on the screen. How the hell are we supposed to rank them? Name. The moment Huaishur opened his eyes, he saw a huge goose-shaped creature standing in front of him. It had glasses on the bridge of its nose and was holding a writing board and a pen in its hand. Gender, age, occupation. What the hell? Huaishur was stunned. He quietly flipped through the Book of Destiny in his soul. Holy *T, I haven't even had a chapter, and you're already reopening a volume for me? When he saw the recording left by Crow, his face turned green with fright. Oh my God, so you snuck into the rookie competition just to give me such a big job? And you did it during AF*King livestream. You ran away with something under the nose of the whole world. He did not even need to think to know how many people in the world were frantically looking for this stupid crow. It was probably on the blacklist of all the major pedigrees, not to mention the Ingzhou pedigree. If it was exposed, there would be 10,000 people from Ingzhou who would immediately come looking for him to play with 100 million yuan worth of jade shattering. Even if he didn't know what the God's Wedge was, could it be 20 Ferrari coupons that could make the strongest in America fight for it? Through the Book of Prophesy, he secretly sent a message over. Let's meet and split it in half. After a long time, Crow's message came intermittently from the Book of Destiny. Can I give you the whole thing? Huaishir was stunned for a long time. He was suspicious. When did this woman become so generous? Then he saw the second half of Crow's message. I've already swallowed the whole thing. I don't think it's easy to split it. If you want, I'll give you the whole thing, okay? No, thank you, goodbye. Huaishir rolled his eyes and didn't say anything more. He could feel that the other crow didn't seem to be in a good state, as if she was about to fall asleep. After a few more words of advice to Huaishir, she went offline. He didn't know where she disappeared to. She swallowed such a big thing. Would she have indigestion? Huaishir rubbed the bridge of his nose and was inexplicably worried. Then he noticed the goose-like creature waiting in front of him for a long time. He suddenly looked up awkwardly. I'm sorry, what did you just say? Asking for your name, gender, and age, the goose-like creature said. Seeing Huaishir's twitching expression, the goose-shaped creature seemed to be confused. She lowered her head and looked at the form on the table. That's strange. Tomorrow's news said that this would help you relax. What's wrong? Oh, there's also a sentence. It wants me to tell you. You're awake. The sex change operation was successful. Can you please be nicer to me? Huaishir couldn't help but sigh. He rubbed his aching forehead. Where am I? The hospital operated by the Jinling Astronomy Association for Sublimators. VIP ward, the goose-like creature explained. Due to the damage to your soul, you fell into a coma after the competition and couldn't participate in the award ceremony. Therefore, we could only send you here and wait for you to recover naturally. I have to say, Mr. Huaishir, your performance in the rookie competition was excellent. It's been a long time since I've seen such an outstanding sublimator like you. Huaishir just remembered that his shameful performance seemed to be under the global live broadcast. His expression couldn't help but twitch again. He paused for a moment and coughed awkwardly. May I ask who you are? The goose-like creature raised her little wings and scratched her head. I'm the representative of the Giant Goose Group's Commerce Department, and I'm also one of the members of the Asian Rookie Competition Organizing Committee. I'm here on behalf of the organizing committee to give you the award. Huaishir was stunned for a long time. He couldn't believe it. What the hell? I won an award. Wait a minute. Wasn't he already dead? How could he still win an award after dying? Immediately after, the goose-like creature took out a box from her pocket and placed it in front of Huaishir. After opening it, there was actually a crystal statue that looked remarkably similar to Huaishir. It was obviously made in his appearance. On the statue, a war horse stood upright. Huaishir raised the sword of virtue as if he was leading a magnificent army. He looked incomparably impressive. Even Huaishir himself was amazed by his own handsomeness. What made him even more surprised was that the entire statue was carved out of a large piece of origin substance crystal. The origin substance, which was the size of hundreds of people, had been exquisitely bound into a solid form by alchemy. It reflected the sunlight outside the window, sparkling brightly. Oh my, I'm already here. Why did I still bring something? How much is this thing worth? At the base of the statue, there was a line of large golden words. Congratulations to Mr. Huaishir for winning third place in the 19th Asian Rookie Competition. And it was even third place. Huaishir was shocked. He completely did not know that because of this ranking, The organizing committee had already broken out in the office 2 days ago. According to the rules of the competition, the ranking was determined according to the order in which the contestants entered the winner's door. But at the end of the competition, the only contestant who walked out of the winner's door was Luo Xian. Yi Shuai was still squatting in Yamatai, squatting in 3rd New Bianliang City, sleeping. According to this train of thought, the champion should be Luo Xian. But anyone with a discerning eye could see that Luo Xian had already been defeated by Huai Shi before this. If Huai Shi had defeated her and entered the winner's door, then the evaluation of the champion would naturally be correct. But the problem was, after he won, he was killed by the aftereffects of exceeding the limit. Moreover, in terms of strength, the champion should be the current great white fox, Yi Shuai. But the problem came again. Yi Shuai had already advanced. She had already surpassed the limit of 3 stages and had even advanced twice. It was as if she was playing around. It was very clear that she was no longer in the category of a rookie. Moreover, until the end of the competition, she did not leave Yamatai City. It could be seen as giving up the qualifications to participate. But if she did not meet the qualifications to participate and was not included in the ranking, then this rookie competition would become a complete joke. Because of these points, everyone in the emergency meeting was unable to stop arguing and even fought, and after everyone had finished fighting a few rounds, Bai Zhe, who had been slacking to the end, took advantage of the fact that no one had the strength to resist. He directly took a marker and wrote Yi Shuai, Luo Xian, and Huai Shi's 3 names on the blackboard and sent it out as the results of the competition. Diding, who was outside the arena, immediately announced it live. Under the clamor of the debaters, this troublesome matter was completely settled. In reality, the majority of people felt that this ranking was quite fair. Although some of the rules were ignored, it was the most convincing ranking. No matter if it was Huai Shi's 2 performances as a prince, or Luo Xian's terrifying ability and talent, or even Yi Shuai's shocking talent, it was obvious to all. Only Huai Shi, who had never cared about the rankings of the competition, did not expect that he would actually get a 3rd place. He had profited. It was as if he had opened his eyes from the floor and saw a smoking man telling him, "You are the best out of all the rookies." There was a sudden feeling of fear and surprise. Although it is only 3rd place, but in the eyes of many of the audience, it is no different from 1st place. Seeing his hesitant appearance, the goose creature thought that he was dissatisfied and quickly said seriously, "Your performance has fully demonstrated your outstanding ability and admirable integrity. In this year's contestants' WeChat popularity poll, you have won the support of the audience and finally obtained 1st place. Please take a look. These are all bouquets sent by your supporters after they heard that you were admitted to the hospital." With that, he opened the door to the inside of the ward. In an instant, flowers gushed out like a waterfall and instantly covered Huai Shi's sluggish expression, making him look as if he was sleeping among 100 flowers. His appearance was incomparably peaceful. Through the door frame, he could see the terrifying storehouse-like area behind the door and the countless flowers that had already been stuffed inside. Just by using Mountain Ghost's senses, he could feel the terrifying amount of vitality that was close to the entire botanical garden. "These are all from my fans." Huai Shi was dumbfounded. "Oh my God, am I going to be famous?" For some reason, he suddenly had an ominous premonition. You're tuning into the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.